It's a secret, but it's an open secret. It's plain to all, but only a few see and understand. Then don't you understand this parable? Then how will you understand any parable? It's a secret, but it's an open secret. It's plain to all, but only a few see and understand. Then Jesus said to them, don't you understand this parable? Then how will you understand any parable?
Understand this parable? Then how will you understand any parables?
It's a secret, but it's an open secret. It's plain to all, but only a few see and understand. Then don't you understand this parable? Then how will you understand any parables? It's a secret, but it's an open secret. It's plain to all, but only a few see and understand. Then Jesus said to them, don't you understand this parable? Then how will you understand any parables?
Well. It's been quite some time, has it not? Virtually not alone. We're back. We are once again virtually not alone. Shout out to the venerable general, Grimwald Gaius Grim. He was of the third LARP ingression protocol, if I remember when I first came across the wise old general. And it's through his leadership that we know the rules of the VNA bubble. If I don't make you guys feel virtually not alone, you guys have to shame me in the comments. You have to shame me in the comments to tell me, hey, bro, this is not virtually not alone. This is some other thing that we don't like. It's good to be back. I had a couple weddings. Actually, I guess it was just one wedding, but it felt like a couple, all wrapped up into one. And then Jonathan Dumire and Joe Cross, the estuary Lewis and Clark, the Angels sent from Van Donk. They came to town. They visited my actual home, slept on my actual couch and guest bed, met my actual wife. Can you believe it? Saw me without the shades. Can you believe it? It was a good time. It was a real good time. And they've got quite the adventure ahead of them still. They've had quite... The thing that you guys don't know is that the videos are like 2 weeks behind, 2 or 3 weeks behind. And they are completely unplugged from most of the conversations in the corner. Because they're hanging with people in real life, face to face, eye to eye. And so, yeah, meanwhile, you've got Jonathan trying to be a content house, and he's doing his best. And Joe's, the adult in the room often. He's got a lot of wisdom, Joe. That's why he has the distinct privilege of always having the final word on the conversation, as far as I'm concerned. And in real life, it was weird because he would say something and the stream wouldn't end, and the guys wouldn't disappear. They were actually still in my living room. And so the conversation had to continue, even though most of the time Joe had given the decisive word on the matter. But much like conversations, this stream must go on. So this stream has a theme today, and it's been promised to you folks on X. We're going to be trying to mash up some Anglican chant and some Italian disco. I've been practicing on the Italian disco for our man Kale. Am I quiet, Mark? Can anybody else confirm that, or does Mark need to turn his speakers up? Probably you need to turn your speakers up. That would be my guess. It does seem, though, like oftentimes StreamYard is trying to automatically adjust mic volume. I never gave you permission to do that. All right. We should be louder now. That should be much better for you, Mark. I'm sorry. I apologize. That's on me, folks. It's been a while. It's been 2 weeks. Yeah, so we're back in the saddle. And the Italian disco part of it, I think, will be fairly straightforward. And then I think the real finesse, the real subtlety of the beat we'll make today is going to come down to the chant, integrating the chant, as it were. How do, in this world full of bleeps and bloops, we return to the chant? So, of course, this is ultimately a kumbaya stream. But it's also, it's not a chill stream. This is the Saturday cookup. So, although I'm going to be incredibly bored with any talk of post-World War II consensus or the crumbling of liberalism or post-liberalism, anti-enlightenment, I'm going to be incredibly bored with that. I'm going to just be bored with that kind of thing. If you want to talk about how silly Drake looked in his new music video, then I would be more than happy to talk about that. But yeah, we'll see. I have not been as tapped into the videos this week either. So if there, I saw Peugeot and Boyce, which I feel like I never. Jonathan Peugeot sometimes says stuff and it just never kind of sinks in. You know, just never kind of. Benjamin Boyce and his voice is so calm. The conversation, Boyce voice. They lull me to sleep with their tender, dulcet tones. And what else? But that, that's kind of like the post World War II consensus thing too. You know, they hit on that. Seems like Jordan Peterson's meme face kind of got some traction this week. If we're the Peterson sphere, even though all of us have disagreements with Jordan Peterson, and that name really only came about as a reactionary response to disagreements on the types of metaphysics that a name like This Little Corner acronymed and anachronized as TLC. So, well, I may have committed to the bit a little too hard there, lost the weave. But anyway, that was supposed to be a request for any videos that you guys think that we could watch while I make this beat. You know, or of course I can always just you could just listen to me make the beat. But you know how I like to roll. I like to put something on top of that to really overload the senses so that I can forget that anybody could be watching this. Anyway, enough about me. What do we think? Any feel free to send me a video on Discord, I suppose. If we should watch that, and let me know in the comments if you have done it. And then I'm going to get to work on this beat, and after I feel comfortable with the direction of the beat, I'll drop the link. We can hang out, hear about, all of the Europeans and the non-Americans can lick their wounds after we flexed our might on our mighty day of independence. What else? What else have I been thinking about? Not much. Oh, actually I have. So this is what I've been thinking about. My wife and I are moving at the end of this month. So if you want to find my Ko-Fi link, it's in the description. But I've got a goal set up to help with some moving expenses. I don't want anybody giving me their last penny or anything like that. But if you've got a little extra dough and you're looking for a crazy person on the internet to give it to, I'll more than happily accept your gift, and I'd be very, very appreciative of it. But there's no amount of money you could give me that would keep me from grifting. So yeah, find the Ko-Fi link. Donate to my Ko-Fi. Ko-Fi.com/McMosav. McMosav. That's me. God's silliest goose back in action, and I'm just glad to see all the names. Good to see you, Tunji. Good to see you, Mark. Good to see you, Chris, Yoav. Marcher, Signs in the Dust. Got so many folks I like to think of as friends in the video today. So anyway, let's get down to it. I need to sample this. Let's see. I'll share my screen. Once again, feel free to send me a YouTube video, and we can just talking about synthesizing chant with jazz. Yeah. You probably stole that idea from me, and my lawyers, my IP lawyers are going to be on your ass, Rigel. Watch your six, bro. Don't steal any of my... Can you imagine if I was... Oh, hey, Cassandra. Good to see you too, Rigel. But can you imagine if I was like, yeah, and that talent show you did, and your whole playing music while you stream thing. Of course, Chad did it first, and many folks have done it on the internet. But like, this is my space, bro. You're in my intellectual zone. You're taking away my fans. No, that would be incredibly silly. I actually did watch an interesting video that I could play, and it's about this guy who convinces his like boomer retired dad to play video games with him after a life of his dad being like, video games are a waste of time. Oh yeah, it's Byzantine chant. You're right. We're good. Good. We're fine. We're good. I'm gonna have to do mine in make sure mine's in 12 tone equal temperament, and I stick to that. You know, no microtonality I'm allowed. No, we'll probably get some. It's probably Pythagorean. The stuff that would be my guess. You know, that's what the human ear tends towards. No, it was not. Yeah. Dark Souls. Yeah. Well, that's probably because our algorithms are all linked. You know. What's the Blade Runner? Cells within cells. It was very, very wholesome. I thought that there was some I don't know, Tingy. Maybe since you've seen it, would you mind watching it again with a kind of eye towards TLC? Because I thought one of the things that was interesting was the participatory aspect that they were talking about, and I think the idea of good conversation as a type of game could be helpful. This is, of course, the genius of Grimm, that he's kind of been on this a long time. But it's the gamification aspect of, and all the rewards work similarly, right? Like the dopamine hit of the comments and the ability to kind of try an idea out, and if it dies, it's not like you have to stop playing. I mean, sometimes there are some really bad ideas thrown around. I'm not going to point any fingers. That's not my style. But I'll admit, and I probably have pointed, I've probably made some really dumb points in the past too, but that's kind of the, I think that's a little bit of what we're doing here is repeated games, if you think of the conversation as a type of game. Yeah. Okay, let's just watch it. I will, but first I need to sample this Anglican chant real quick. So let me. Oh yeah, I was going to share my screen. That's what I was doing when you guys distracted me. Yeah, I thought the video was really well done. Narratively, it kind of works, and et cetera, et cetera. So we'll do that, but like I said, I need to sample the Anglican chant first. So, got to do that. Good morning, Sherry. Good to see you, Mark S. The gang's all here. The gang is all here. This will also kind of be a test of if you guys can hear it or not. This is just so cool to me. It's such great. See what the title of this is? 1 hour of solemn Anglican hymns and chants to bring you to repentance. It's got the Luther Pepe. Oh gosh. Why did they have to be so? When you're trying to be kumbaya, there's a lot you end up having to forgive, There's a lot you have to forgive. I don't see the Protestants using the Pepe that often, so forgive me for kind of getting a kick out of it. It's not very kumbaya of me, but it is funny. Oh my goodness. This is so good. You know, there's something to that, Sherry. Reminded of the verse, it's God's kindness that leads to repentance. Yeah, there's a sense in which if the Lord wasn't merciful and kind, he wouldn't even offer the opportunity of forgiveness. So there's a forgiveness that occurs. There's a grace, you might call it, that occurs before even the repentance. Incredible. If y'all weren't here, I would just listen to this and like cry and like journal. Send memes to Tayo. We are back, baby. We are so back. If this doesn't get you revved up, you're in the wrong place. Stop it there. I mean, we could just make this a Mick Mo reacts to Anglican chant stream. Have to pull up the lyrics. Good grief. No, that's the operation we're on today. Is we're going to take this and now we're going to turn it into a beat. In the meantime, now here's the problem with the video I'm thinking of playing is it might be. My dog is barking at something. I wonder if the mailman's here or something. It might have music. The video I want to play might have music in the background. And that would be annoying. So I'd almost prefer to like listen to something. We could peek in on OG Rose again. That conversation with Philosophy Portal guy is still... Actually, hold on. I'm going to have to play some branding and see what my dog's barking at. He usually only barks like this when there's someone like at the door. So let's see. Let's play some branding. Oh, he stopped. Well, I still want to check it out. We'll do a throwback retro.
Tell me that you've lived here your whole life. No, not yet. Are you married? No, no bad habit. No bad habit, eh? Well, what do you chew that tobacco for? For nothing. Nobody's fool enough to pay me for it. Well, tell me, how far is it to the next crossroads? Follow your nose and you'll come to it. Follow your nose, follow your nose and you'll
All right, we're back. We're back. It was, in fact, just the Amazon ban. So now we comes to the part where I need to play the video. I need to find. Let's just go ahead and find the boomer one. Not the. It's not about it. It's about a boomer, but that's not the point of the video. I shouldn't call it that. Let's see. Got to wade through all the Anglican chant to get back to that. And the Hawks, the Atlanta Hawks, my Atlanta Hawks, having a lovely off season.
Things I
First off season to get an Atlanta Hawks fan excited in 5, 6, maybe. I can't remember the last time I was this excited as a Hawks fan. Since yeah, since Joe Johnson, Josh Smith, Al Horford, that crew. You can check No Context Nathaniel for material. Is that a channel? Oh, it is indeed, in fact. Oh, gosh. So much of his stuff is... Oh, yeah, we could address the Jay Dyer... do they worship the same God stuff? Let's see. The Psychology of Snow White. This channel, I mean, I'm so glad to have found this. Good grief. How fun. Absolutely cooked. Oh, Formscapes released something with Jonathan and Joe. Well, I think that's what we should watch. That's what we should watch. Good looking.
Totally forgot to turn off the air conditioner or lighting situation.
Good looking out, Nathaniel. Not that, please. Not that, please, they say. Okay, we'll not do that. Then we will do my dad beat Dark Souls as his first game. It changed him. But remember, the whole point of this is just to have something in the background while I perform the Kumbaya concoction of Italian disco, Italian summer disco. You know, the type that goes along with Campari and cigarettes and mustaches and like very simple pasta, but it tastes better than you've ever tasted anything in your whole life. And all the people fight each other, but then they end up like kissing each other on the cheek afterwards. This is what we're talking about. Kumbaya vibes. We got to bring the Anglicans and the Catholics back together through the power of Italian disco and chant. And in the meantime, we'll watch this this dad get his life changed by playing Dark Souls. All because Tunji has such a powerful sway over the direction of a Saturday cookout. It's just incredible. I'm surprised he's not in bed already. Let's see. And we'll share with the sound. All right.
I have against video games is video games can expand to consume.
So
the
keep an
amount
eye out
of
for the
time
like
you allot to it. That can destroy you.
the ways in which both the rewards and dangers of participation within online communities and the things we do here is similar to that of streaming, playing a video game with your dad. What if the video game with your dad was philosophy and theology, and the dad wasn't your dad, but was instead a various group of misfit uncles and aunties? That's That was my takeaway. Anyway, here it goes.
When I was a kid, I would sneak across this exact street to my neighbor's house with my Nintendo console, cords, games, controllers, everything. Why? Because my parents would give me max of 1 hour a day to play games, but if I could just get across the street,
See, but here's the thing.
unnoticed,
Like I said, this has so
I could
much
game for
music in the
hours.
background.
Weirdly, if I wanted to spend all
There's too much
day just
music in the
mindlessly
background.
watching movies or TV, that was totally fine.
So why not video games? Because my dad always said,
Video games are an absolute waste of time.
Well, now that it's been 20 years, I started an experiment. 9 months ago, my dad agreed to play Dark Souls as his very first video game ever played live on stream for the entire internet to see.
oh baby,
Northern Undead Asylum.
Bruce is
I'm in the
loose.
asylum.
All right, so I'm actually on my way to go see him to hold up my end of the deal for him agreeing to do all of this.
Because I'm basically United Healthcare with how I've monetized this senior citizens suffering.
This was going to be a test of game design, of my dad's patience, and the preconceived notions a lot of people have of the value of just a good video game.
What has happened since then was the greatest gaming playthrough in history and has completely altered my dad's perception of video games, his views on internet culture, and even changed our relationship as father and son. Let me take you through his experience of Dark Souls as his very first video game ever played. First question, how good were you at the game when you started playing?
Probably the better question is how bad was I?
Those of you who remember the beginning of this playthrough, remember that this is the kind of high-octane gameplay that we were running for hours at the start.
I hit that well as hard as I can. It still doesn't go down. The most difficult thing at first was camera work, figuring out how to get the camera to do what I wanted, because that camera directs where your character goes. And I remember directing the camera and ending up banging into a wall. And then I think I got it fixed, and I bang into the exact same wall again.
Yeah, but it was impressive if you were able to recognize that it even was the same wall again. Because most of the time, it was just the same wall. You didn't know.
I hit them seconds apart, so it was pretty.
Bing, 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 bong, yeah.
Dang, why isn't this working? I'm doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
We take it for granted how intuitive it feels to use this because we've been, moving the character with this stick and looking with the camera with this stick since Halo.
But in 2000, before Halo was even released, Alien Resurrection came out using the exact same controller scheme, which GameSpot's review famously called completely unplayable because of the controls.
And I threw this man into an already difficult video game with a confusing controller scheme that he didn't even know existed.
This is what's called an Xbox controller.
Yeah, I recognize that.
You've seen me touch these before and use them. An Xbox of the game, moving and looking around. These two sticks right there.
These two sticks right here.
Those are your thumbs there.
Put my thumbs there.
The one on the left, that's going to handle the direction your character walks. You walk left, you walk right. But let's say you want to look around in the room. The right stick is going to handle, think of it like your character's head. You're looking.
You're panning to the left.
Hand to the left, hand to the right.
Up or down. You can look up your nose.
You can. So you heard that Dark Souls was a difficult game. I did not hide that from you. So what did you
No,
expect?
you didn't hide it from me. You kind of threw it in my face. You said, this is going to make you into a man. That's what you basically said.
Fuck him!
Get him how? What weapon do I have?
You have a broken sword in your hand.
Where's my broken? Oh,
You just stand. No!
how do I attack? You didn't tell me.
What did you expect then when I said people said, oh, it's a difficult video game, what did you expect a difficult video game would be like? Why would it be difficult?
I thought Halo was a difficult video game because I could not maneuver at all. One thing I didn't expect was that I would need to have your intimate coaching as to where to go. I thought it would be a little more intuitive to know, oh, I turn right here or left.
Yep.
Or I jump, or whatever. Again, using the controller, I eventually learned how to jump and how to roll and how to do those things. And some of them I used a lot. Some of those features.
All right, I can't do it with the music in the background. Looks like Tunji posted something somewhere. Let's see. Something Tunji posted. Where'd you post it, Tunji? Ah. The Bathos of Bezos? Is that what you wanted me to play? Can't be. Can't be. It is. Unbelievable. This better not be hating on my boy. Like sticking up for Jeff Bezos.
Welcome.
Where are the Bezo heads? The Bezo bros. Elon's got his own bros. Nobody likes Bezos. Bezos can't get no love. Bezos can't get no peso. No, he can get pesos. What is that? Bezos? Is that kisses? Somebody who knows Latin. Enlighten me. All right. Got to share this one instead. Share this tab instead.
To readers of the Lost Art. With your presenter, Dr. Paul
This thing's
Anthony
so
Taylor,
long.
a recovering academic. And the title of today's talk is The Bathos of Bezos, Cultural Death in Venice. Bathos, noun. Especially in a literary work, an effect of anticlimax created by an unintentional lapse in mood, from the sublime to the trivial or ridiculous.
Yeah, I know, Nico. I know it's doubled.
Well, hi everybody.
Is it that big of a problem for
I'm
you?
sure you'll recognise this image. So I'll be talking about the marriage of the Bezoses, if you can put it that way. And straight off the bat, because as you can probably tell, I'm a bit of a fashion icon. It struck me just as they knew that there was going to be loads of photographs, and they knew Mrs. Bezos was going to model what looks to be some fabric version of a toilet roll holder. But surely even I know, being not tourism challenged as I am, even I know that don't go with the pattern. So why didn't they for all the money they've spent on making this supposedly perfect wedding in human history? Why didn't they just have a blank or plain marquee or lack of pattern, just plain monocolour for the background? This was always going to clash. But anyway, it's a surprise that I was employed as an event organiser, having noticed this. But here we are, the notion of oceanic feeling, I'll explain as we go along. And I ask your indulgence in this talk because I'm going to go off on slight tangents, but I absolutely promise you by the end of the talk all the strands will be pulled together. So there might be moments when you're thinking, what has this particular item got to do with the rest of it? But please trust me, I will bring it all together and hopefully show you how it all hangs together. But this notion of the oceanic feeling, that's what I'm building up to. But basically it's an idea of, without sounding too woo-woo, being at one with the universe. And I'm opposing that notion. I'm going to claim that comes for me at least, because I'm not a particularly woo-woo person.
Point.
I'm using that technical term woo-woo, but I hope you know
I'll just do it at 1.5.
All-encompassing consciousness.
Good point, Sartori.
Let's all teach the world to sing, all that feel-good stuff that I struggle with. But oceanic feeling, it relates to that. And I'm opposing it to the egotistical banality. Instead of an ocean, the canals of banality that the Bezoses... It's difficult to say that. The two new members of the Bezos family and their cohorts of celebrities, what they've inflicted on the world. So that's the idea. And just to give you a very quick... I am getting this talk.
Bezos is a humanitarian.
More than you probably want.
He feeds
from
my
the dark
dog.
Interior, the cobwebs of my dark psyche. So please, in the comments, point out if you'd rather in future I really didn't bother. But there's just various elements of today's talk that I can relate to personally. So I thought I'd try this, happy clappy sharey thing, which I don't normally do much of at all.
Is this happy clappy?
This is the oceanic feeling. Also relates to. There's a guy called Sandor Ferenczi who was a colleague of Freud early on, and I think with a lot of his colleagues he fell out with him eventually. But he has this concept of thalassa, and it's parts of his book about a thalassa are laugh out loud funny, even though they're not supposed to be, because his notion is that we came from ultimately from lungfish that came out of the water pools at the earliest time of evolution, and his idea was we're all in various ways trying to get back to the sea. And that can manifest itself also in psychological forms as returning to the womb. So I'll talk about that later in regards to reading and the amniotic calmness it can induce. But it just reminded me of the reverse thalassa is basically coming out of the amniotic, basically being born. You're coming out of the calmness and serenity of the amniotic sac, where all your nutritional needs are met, and you're being thrown out in the birth pangs of pain for your mother into a cold, unforgiving, bright world. And so that's the opposite of thalassa in some senses. But I had a funny experience because my good friend Richard Grannon was giving me dropped me off at Liverpool Lime Street train station because I'd done a video with him. And this is the type, I don't think this is exactly the car he's got, but it's very similar to this. It's some BMW sports type car. And I'm quite a large bloke. And there's 4 of us in the car at the time. Or 3 of us, but 2 in the back. No, there's 4 of us, sorry, yeah, there's 4 of us. And I had to go in the back, and Richard body shamed me because he didn't draw the seat back far enough. And it was difficult enough getting in the car, but on the way out of the car at Lime Street Station in Liverpool, it looked like, if you remember the scene from the film Alien, when the alien comes out of the guy's stomach, that was shouted at me by a guy waiting in a 4x4. It took me ages to get out of this car to squeeze out of it. Like I say, going back to being born again. And this typical Scouser in a 4x4 shouted, it's like watching the bloody Alien. And it reminded me, if you ever watch, what's it called? It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. There's a segment in that, there's a scene where Danny DeVito is hidden in the back of the couch and comes out of it naked. So luckily I wasn't naked, but I'm traumatized, so I'm talking to you about it. It's a type of catharsis. But anyway, there's reverse thalassus. I'll be talking about thalassa as well. But I've shared far too much.
What is he on about? What is he on about?
Activity that went on in the Bezos wedding in Venice.
This is Tunji's fault, everyone.
It's always been
if you don't like this, we blame Tunji.
And conspicuous consumption, the doges and political intrigue and all sorts going on. But I just love this particular picture because I believe I'm right in saying this is one of the many fame-hungry Kardashians, more of which later. But the idea of one of these celebrity creatures is being photographed by another one, and behind her is yet another person either filming or taking a photograph. So it's a beautiful practical example of the hyper-real, which I just think, yeah, it reminded me of a quote I've used before, and I'll often go back to. I just love it. And if you think it's 1958, The Adventure of a Photographer by the Italian novelist and short story writer Italo Calvino, and I just think it summarises, and amazingly, in 1958, so it's almost 70 years ago, and yet it's so apposite and prescient The minute you start saying something, how beautiful, we must photograph it, you're already close to the view of the person who thinks that everything that is not photographed is lost, as if it had never existed, and that therefore, in order really to live, you must photograph as much as you can. And to photograph as much as you can, you must either live in the most photographable way possible, or else consider photographable every moment of your life. The first course leads to stupidity, the second to madness. And I just think that summarised perfectly the whole ethos of these celebrities taking photographs of celebrities taking photographs of the Bezos wedding. And now here is a this is for people of my generation, the dreaded boomers. And if you were born in the UK at a certain time, he happens to have been a Liverpool comedian, and he was truly demented. But Kenny Everett, and this was his character, Cupid Stunt.
What's the asshat thing?
And I encourage you to go on YouTube and find some videos, because he basically was always pretending to be interviewed, or he was speaking directly to the camera. And his catchphrase was, I'm sorry for my awful impression, but he basically said, it's all done in the best possible taste, and rotate his legs in the air, jump up in his seat while staying seated almost, if that makes sense, and switch his legs around. And what I found vaguely amusing about this is that this came to mind when I was thinking of the people in the Bezos wedding. It's all done in the best possible taste. It seemed to be the mantra that they were working under, and yet it had the opposite effect. And also, just as a side note, the idea that Kenny Everett doing this, I'm guessing this was the late 70s or 80s, I don't quite know when this was taken from, but the idea that he would now not be allowed to do this for various reasons, but at the time, this was the absolute height of hilarity. And there are people who've won Eurovision looking like this, and no one's allowed to find it humorous in the slightest. So it just shows you how over a couple of generations or more, the definition of satire, what Kenny Everett was trying to satire actually cannot be satirized anymore upon fear of upsetting people. But anyway, there's Cupid Stunt, and we will be returning to her, him, they, them at the very end of this talk. So this is from a shopping list. This is how exciting this channel gets. But the following items should be in stock at all times, regardless of quantity used. All open packets must be replaced after each visit. Now, just to warn you, it's the actual text, without the spelling mistake, from the manual for staff at Jeffrey Epstein's house on the island, the Epstein Island, written by Ghislaine Maxwell. And this was published, I got this off a website published in the UK.
Why, Tunji?
And this was giving you an excerpt from the actual manual that staff had to adhere to. So this is the shopping list. And this is just an excerpt. These are the beverages that you had to, the stock check that they had to do to make sure there were supplies all the way around the house. So you've got Fiji water, talking of which. Then you've got Maxwell House coffee, more of which in a second. And then you've got Starbucks ground Colombian coffee. And these all have to be checked off to make sure that there are adequate supplies. And then, as if that wasn't enough, this was listed as Ms. Maxwell's breakfast preferences. Maxwell House coffee served with milk. And this is the eponymous Maxwell House coffee. And I understand there are many reasons why I have a very odd mind. And I understand the darkness and the horrible things that must have gone on the Epstein Island. So I'm genuinely not trying to downplay those. But one thing that stuck with me, because my mind is weird, when I'd read about this and I realised you're on this fantasy island where all these billionaires are hanging out, and at least some of them, including Mr. Epstein, are drinking either this or pre-ground Starbucks coffee. And that set me off thinking. It relates, and this is why this talk may seem quite diverse and discursive, but actually, one of the unifying themes is the poor taste of incredibly rich people. So I started off talking about the Bezos wedding, and I'm now talking about Epstein and the billionaire's island of depravity that he created. But please, just keep this in mind. This is like a metaphor that I'm asking you to concentrate on.
It's a metaphor.
The banality. I mentioned banality in an earlier slide. But rich people's banality of mind. They can have all the money in the world. But
I'm starting to see where you were going with this, Tunji. I like it.
Taste.
I'm starting to see the vision.
A lot of their mental lives are in the worst possible taste. In this case, literally, in coffee terms, this is one of the worst things if you're a coffee snob. I'm about to indulge my coffee snobbery, impose it upon you. But this is what they're drinking, some of them. And just to reiterate and underline, I'm asking you to think of this image when I also talk later on about the quality of mind that reading allows you to develop. And the underlying point I'd like to make is that you can be a billionaire, and if you can't understand or are not able to read certain things, all the money in the world hasn't helped you with what I'm going to develop in future videos, a concept called mental wealth. So rather than mental health, there's a thing called mental wealth, and it strikes me that a lot of these very, very rich people rolling in money either have no taste either in instances like this that are demonstrably provable, but more generally, how many of them understand great literature, how many of them understand any philosophy. And I'm fascinated by that, because it just, again, sorry to reiterate the point, but it's the underlying banality of what seems to be from the outside, this amazingly extravagant, glamorous lifestyle. So, back to the Bezos wedding, when they're on those Venetian ferries, little taxi boats, I can't stop imagining of, rather than how, how envious I should be, the banality of their conversations in the most part. What do they speak about? The great Maxwell House cup of coffee they had in the morning. But anyway, just to develop this in more depth. Given that some billionaires, at least, has been documented in Ghislaine Maxwell's
do it like this.
manual for Epstein Island.
Or actually,
I'm just showing you, this isn't mine. This I've taken off the internet, but I have an extensive coffee collection. I'm not a materialistic person, but so far as I am, it seems to apply to tea and coffee, which I'll talk about tea in a second. But I've estimated roughly in pounds sterling. The grinder in the background is called a niche grinder, and it's good, but relatively low level. So none of this is the most expensive you could buy. That grinder is probably about £550, so what's that?
this is fine, I suppose.
The kettle is a really good one, an Antler kettle, but the important thing is you could get a stovetop version. It's the long, thin spout that matters, because it allows you to pour accurately the water, more accurately than a normal kettle, over the filter that you can see next to it. And there's a couple of scales. I think the kettle would cost about £150, $200 maybe, and £100 for the scales and filter carafe thing. So all in all, that's about £800, call it $1,000 roughly. And what interests me is that
now we got to do the Italian
coffee
baseline.
beans from a good coffee roaster, rather than beans that have been roasted and sat in a supermarket for months on end. So I get them sent to me. I have, believe it or not, in the past roasted my own beans. I've got the equipment for that. That's how sad I am. But if you get sent directly and you know when they've been roasted, the beans are at an optimum from about 2 or 3 days after they've been roasted to about 2.5 weeks is when they're at their absolute best. So if you're following all of that, and you get fresh beans, you've got a decent grinder, this equipment would allow you to have a cup of coffee about as good as it gets. And again, this is probably much better than most billionaires are going to have, because if they have the taste for Starbucks pre-ground coffee, which is already stale, this just gives you an indication of the relative lack of investment you can make, or in our lives. What I'm trying to point out is it's not necessarily about money. I understand, £800 isn't nothing, but with £800 you could have around about the best coffee experience it's possible to have in terms of filter coffee. And this is an example of, it's interesting that Epstein liked Starbucks pre-ground coffee, because in the coffee community, Starbucks is referred to as Charbucks because they over-roast the beans. And I'm not saying these are actual Charbucks beans, but you get the point. This is just an illustration of good, well-roasted beans and over-burned, horrendous, cinder-like beans. And the flavour profile is completely different. But Starbucks leans towards excessively dark roast. Just to repeat, I'm not saying they are Charbucks beans, but that's what they lean towards. And one of the reasons for that is not because they taste better, but if you roasted them like the light ones you can see, if you roast beans properly, you're taking a chance because you want to go as close to what's called second crack when you hear them cracking. And that's the best quality of that particular type of bean. But that would mean that every batch of beans you did, if you roasted them to bring out the best, they would taste slightly differently, even if that was because they tasted better. So what huge brands like Starbucks did is over-roast, which detracts from the flavour profile, but it means you can be much more consistent, because they always know exactly how the beans are going to turn out, which gives you consistency, but it downplays taste. And the ultimate example of that, this is the equivalent for a coffee snob like me of a horror film. Apparently this is a grande iced pumpkin spice latte bought from a scrapbook store in New York City. And always amusing because latte in Italian just means milk. So people think they've been incredibly sophisticated ordering a latte, and the Italians just laugh because it's like little toddlers. Well, that is not a coffee lover's drink. That is basically taking the essence of coffee and doing everything you possibly can to make sure you can't taste any coffee. It's beyond me why you would do that. But anyway, this is all, I'm giving you examples of poor taste. I'm trying to give you a metaphorical example of in the coffee world what the Bezos wedding is equivalent to, and how across society there are lots of things that are done in poor taste that people subscribe to, but they don't. There's no reason why they should. There's no reason why many more people couldn't have a decent home setup for good coffee. But this is presented to them as the acme, the best you aspire to when drinking coffee, and it's absolutely atrocious. It's in the worst possible taste, and maybe even a better example. I've spoken about coffee, but tea. So interestingly, this tea back here is Stash Premium Tea, and I just found this photo which I quite like because it's got a black picture on the mug. It's a tiny bit of artistic integrity, but the idea that this is premium tea. And again, I'm trying to get you to think of the way in which, in our everyday life, what good taste isn't catered for, even though it would be quite easy. So if you know anything about tea, it might not be of interest to you, but tea, it's such a popular drink worldwide, and yet the vast majority of people consume it like this, purely apparently for convenience. But what I'd ask you to think about is that how much more difficult is it to have a teapot and just have a sieve over the sink and rinse out the leaves every time you make a pot? you've got to find somewhere to throw that tea bag. And anyway, tea bags have atrocious quality. So these are the various different types of grades of tea, which I'll explain more. But you see in the corner, dust. This is what goes into tea bags. Fannings or dust, they're two different types. Dust is even worse than fannings. But that's the rubbish that goes in your tea bags. And I'm sure you're tearing your hair out already thinking, what has this got to do with anything? But I'm trying to emphasise the extent to which in our incredibly affluent societies, we still voluntarily do things unnecessarily in poor taste without even realising what poor taste it is. And I'm picking on tea and coffee because they're not, I'm using them as metaphors of wider cultural values, but also literally they're about taste. And I want to try and get across to you how the vast majority of people have tea bags and what by definition they are then missing out on in terms of actual physical taste. So these are how the leaves, you've seen previously the grades of how the tea
looks
is
like it
dried.
did.
But these are how the teas are picked.
Thank you, Yoav and or.
And at the top you see just a single
New
tip.
donation from the
And this means
uneducated
that
philosopher.
when the actual tea leaves are picked by
Thank you, uneducated
pickers
philosopher.
in the plantations, it's an absolute art. Even if you use your fingernails, or you're not allowed to use fingernails or secateurs, cutting implements, because it bruises the tea leaf. So there are techniques to use the balls of your fingers, your fingertips, to snap off just the tip. And if you do that, it's incredibly laborious. It's incredibly skilled because you're trying to fill a huge bag just of those tips. But when it's done, that tea has a completely different quality to the lower forms of tea when you pick much more quickly more of the leaf.
Is
But
all
even
this
when
tea
all
talk
of
meant to
this is
trigger
done,
us Americans after 4th of
what's
July? Is
interesting
that what you're
is
trying to do?
it's incredibly relatively
Oh, we got to
cheap.
bring up tea, bro.
Even if you bought one of the best types of tea that involves just picking the buds, I figured out it must be about, I have a Japanese black tea that I order all the way from Japan, and it must work out in Japanese black tea. It's rare because they don't make a lot of it, so there's very relatively little supply compared to somewhere like India or China, because most Japanese tea tends to be green. In Japan, there isn't an awful lot of land available for agriculture because of the nature of Japan. But even taking all that into account, I worked out, I think it costs about 75 pence or $1 for every small pot of tea. Now in those terms, I'm having a very rare, very relatively expensive, or by tea standards, a very, very good pot of tea. And it's £1 a pot. Oh, sorry, $1, 75 pence. There are Indian Assam teas that you can get. They're called clonal because they're not just they're not grown from tea seeds. They're grown from cloned plants. So it's the best of Assam. And that's about 60 cents. You could make a small pot of tea for 60 cents. So in terms of, it all sounds incredibly snobbish. But actually, if you look at the economics of it, people are drinking much more expensive drinks of massively lower quality. And I'd argue it's because they don't have the knowledge. And this is we're finally getting there. But the point I'm trying to make is the amount of knowledge you can gain, that's all it is, it's knowledge. You don't have to be privileged to have that knowledge. You don't have to be rich to then enjoy the benefits of that knowledge. Good coffee and tea should be available to nearly everyone. But it isn't, because society has these ways of proceeding that encourages not to
Why is it always on society?
And what I'm
Why is
doing
it always
is proving
society's
this
fault?
is true in terms of things like tea and coffee. Imagine how much worse it is for aspects of reading, for the life of the mind.
The life of the mind.
That's
I like the way
why
he
I
said
wanted
that.
to bore you senseless with what might seem to be just the finer peculiarities of tea and coffee. But if you just keep in mind that they are metaphors for the wider processes of society that keep the best possible taste down and don't allow people to access the finer things of the mind. And to take it back to the whole Epstein thing, the fact that some of the richest people in the world, when they wake up in the morning, I just think one of the greatest pleasures in life is a good cup of coffee in the morning. And he's drinking Starbucks pre-ground coffee, stale, awful coffee. And he was mixing with billionaires, because I think it's debatable how rich Epstein actually was himself. And just to repeat, sorry for flogging this to death, but the parallel I'm making is all these
I'm more of a coffee
incredibly
guy,
wealthy
Anselman.
people,
I'm more of a
what's
coffee
the
guy.
mental equivalent of this awful coffee or awful tea they're drinking? I doubt very much they're enjoying the best of literature, whether some of them may actually own some amazing art. But I'd be very suspicious as to the extent to which they can actually appreciate. They may collect art because they're rich enough, but the ability, you can only, even they can only own so many paintings, whereas you can go to most galleries for free or for a small amount and see some of the best art in the world. And it's not what you can pay, it's what you bring to the party in terms of knowledge, or the way you've developed your aesthetic appreciation, or the types of books you've read that help you enjoy more books because you build up this reservoir of knowledge and you can make references and links between them. Very, very little of this has anything to do with money or wealth. It's mental wealth. It's not wealth. And just to finish, because I don't want to, of this particular section, just to give you yet more, I'm just showing you the complexity. So if you think back to the tea bag, this isn't even. You're a level above.
Think back
what
to the
goes into
tea bag.
bags, and these are the various grades that are possible.
Various possible
So I
grades
quite like
of
this
tea
idea
bags.
of FTG, FOP, the second one. Finest tippy golden flowery orange pico. Far too good for ordinary people. And just to repeat yet again, this all sounds technical, this all sounds incredibly elitist, but when you break down how much they cost, it's actually not that much at all. And these are, I've just listed, not all of them, but a lot of the categories. And at the very bottom, fannings and dust, these are what go into tea bags. So it's the absolute lowest of the low. And I promise you, this is the last you've got to hear from me about tea. But this is pu'er tea, which is fermented, and you get them in cakes. And I'm embarrassed, I'll admit this. I am embarrassed enough to admit that I have a pick, a specially designed pick for pu'er tea, because it's like a tea chisel where you can break up without doing too much damage to tea cakes. But these are fermented in storage cellars for years to develop complex fermented tastes. And this is how, again, they're not that, they're expensive, but not ridiculously when you break them down to how much a small pot of tea costs. So I've done coffee, I've done tea, and there's one more. I have no links with this guy whatsoever, but it did interest me because I think this relates to what counts as popular for the algorithm and how tastes are developed on YouTube. This guy is Belgian, or Flemish, I think, so Flemish, Dutch, Belgian would be his own language. So I'm guessing English is his second or third language, and his English is amazing. And he's got the calmest voice. So he starts off his videos with, hello, and welcome to Belgian Beer Brothers. He's got this really nice, mellifluous voice. And his knowledge of Belgian beer, that's what the channel's all about. And he does other types of beer, but mostly
I'm waiting for
Belgian
my
beer.
instrument to start working.
The quality of his analysis of what many people take for granted, beer is beer. Well, I mean, you can see on the screen he's got a mock bottle of Duff beer, the Homer Simpson favourite. But this guy represents for me an amazing level of knowledge about beer, an amazing ability to assess and describe the taste of excellent, excellent world-class beer, which again, per bottle is not that much compared to what people spend on other stuff in their lives. But if you look at his channel, he's got hardly any views per video. And I'm not shaming him. I'm saying it's such a shame, given the quality of what he's doing, which set me thinking, because I'm hardly setting the world alight in terms of viewing figures. And this video is probably one of the reasons why, the content thereof. But it does fascinate me that even when I do a video, I often think the ones that have done best, the ones that do least well are the worst, are the ones I think actually, in terms of the quality of the content, were best. There seems to be this inverse relationship. And I've seen many people online doing beer reviews, and this guy is brilliant, and he gets no credit. His numbers are really low. So just as a complete side thing, if you get the chance, please check him out and try and bump up his numbers. But it just seems to me emblematic of what the algorithm promotes over genuine good quality. But then to get back to the Bezos, because that was a very large detour. But as I say, if you've had the patience up until now, I'm going to bring all this together, as I said I would at the beginning. But given that the Bezos wedding took place in Venice, and it gave rise to the subtitle Cultural Death in Venice. Death in Venice is a novella by Thomas Mann, the German writer, and this is just one quotation from it. There were profound reasons for his attachment to the sea. He loved it because as a hard-working artist, he needed rest. He needed to escape from the demanding complexity of phenomena and lie hidden on the bosom of the simple and tremendous. Because of a forbidden longing deep within him ran quite contrary to his life's task, and was for that very reason seductive. A longing for the unarticulated and immeasurable, for eternity, for nothingness. To rest in the arms of perfection is the desire of any man intent upon creating excellence, and is not nothingness a form of perfection? And I won't bore you with the whole plot of Death in Venice, but it's a bit dodgy, to be honest. It's a guy who fancies or is attracted to a boy he sees on the beach, and at the very plot spoiler, at the very end, he never acts on this, but at the very end of the novel, he basically falls asleep and dies in his deck chair whilst looking at this young boy. But there's this concept of the oceanic feeling I mentioned at the very beginning, the concept of the sea. And this introduces the Death in Venice by the seaside, looking at the sea. And at the end of the book, he dies in this situation, so he just becomes part of cosmic consciousness again. But it just struck me as the exact opposite of the Bezos mentality of what Venice was turned into. So Thomas Mann takes the concept of a holiday in Venice, explores dark parts of the human psyche. So there's, wildly inappropriate child focus that this old lecherous man has, and turns it into an artistic reflection upon the nature of mortality, this focus upon the sea, the concept of the infinite and the immeasurable, for eternity, for nothingness. And the Bezos focus upon Venice is about the opposite of eternity. It's about the instant gratification of the celebrity photograph, the measurable. So it's about the TikTok and Instagram and followers they can get. It's about all the opposite values that Thomas Mann's discussing here. which made me think about, this coincided, the Bezos wedding, with a couple of books I'd been reading about the act of reading.
I just clocked this up.
And I started off reading the Mark Hodgkinson one, No One Around Here Reads Tolstoy, because it was... He was born almost to the year I was, not quite, I don't think, but within a couple of years of each other. And he describes, he was brought up in Manchester, which was about 35 miles away from Liverpool, not far at all. So geographically very close. The time, I've got vivid memories of the things he described, so it was really a nostalgic read. But it started to make me really angry, because this book encapsulates the type of attitude, you could call it the teabag attitude. He starts off, I think he's got 3,500 books, and he thinks he has a problem. He's got too many books. He's obsessed with collecting books. Well, so am I, but I've never seen it as a problem. And in the end, I think he goes to therapy because he's worried about this mania for collecting books. But he's got this teabag. It's about convenience. He wonders... It's slightly Jekyll and Hyde, because the way he describes the act of reading... He mentioned some serious people. He mentioned some good authors. But then he's quite sniffy. I'll give you examples in a second, some quotes, whereby he's sniffy about elitism. So all the things I was describing about tea and coffee, I think he's the equivalent of defending the tea bag over proper quality tea. And someone like me raging on about why don't people drink
thank you very much, Lance. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, there are instances in the book where he's disappointed that someone he's watching telly with, I think it's a play, Don't Look Back in Anger, and they made a TV adaptation of the play, and the guy watching it with him has a really Philistine response to it. And he doesn't pick him up on it because he doesn't want to get into an argument, but he's disappointed because he can't talk to him about what a good play it was and the use of language and why it's really, a beautiful thing. But then in other parts of the book, he's sniffy about things he think are too elitist. And I don't think he ever reflects upon, he's got this chip on his shoulder that he didn't go to very good school and he didn't have a very good education, but he's loved books all his life. But then in the appendices, he mentions piles of books around his house that he's in the process of reading or about to read, and he gives descriptions of them. And many of them are just low-level teabag type books. So what I'm puzzled about by this book is that no one round here reads Tolstoy. Even the title, I can't work out whether it's a good or bad thing that people don't read Tolstoy, because whilst he seems to be advocating the need for more people to read and what a powerful aspect of life it is, he's also ambivalent about to what extent you read the best possible things you can read. And it's that slight banality, the values he has about what constitutes good literature, and how, scratch the surface, he seems to be saying the type of great literature posh people recommend is somehow tainted by the fact they're posh and privileged. And I'm contrasting that with the Francis Spufford book here, The Child the Books Built. This reminds me of The Oceanic Feeling. I think it's a brilliant book cover because you can see the kid who's created a tent for themselves. They're closed off to the world. This little light where the torchlight they're reading by. And the rest of the world is dark or on the outside. And they're completely caught up in their own interiority. And the Francis Spufford book I might look at in future, I hope to, because I think it's a much, much better book about what reading gives you and why it's important. And I think in some ways Spufford addresses the oceanic feeling. this contact with what Thomas Mann was talking about, the immeasurable, the eternal, and all the things that stand in value terms in opposition to Bezos and company. And I just think the Mark Hodgkinson book is such a disappointment because he has the opportunity to make the same type of arguments, but he seems hamstrung by his own chip on the shoulder, if that's not mixing metaphors, or body parts. He doesn't seem to be able to enjoy the act of reading as much as he should because he doesn't push himself, because he doesn't feel... There's a class issue all the way through. And I think Spufford was brought up in a much more privileged way. But I probably was somewhere in the middle. I had working class parents but grew up in a middle class house. And I had access to a good education, but not a public school education in English terms or a private school in American terms. It turned into an independent school, but I passed a public exam and I didn't have to pay anything. It was basically a scholarship. And Hodgkinson didn't. And this seems to have haunted him for the rest of his life. So I'm in the middle. I'm much more on Spufford's side, but he came from a much more middle-class family than I did. And I'm guessing had a much better education than I did. Whereas Hodgkinson has this lifelong disappointment. But rather than, my attitude's always been, why should only the rich or the privileged have access to the best literature available? So back to the tea and coffee. Ironically, they don't have access to the best tea and coffee because they lack the knowledge. And some posh people, yes, have had private education. They've learned ancient Greek and Latin, and they've had opportunities that I never had. But I've always seen that as a challenge. Why wouldn't you want what they've been gifted? But why shouldn't that be available to absolutely everyone? And I'll give you examples of what, because I don't mean to misrepresent him at all. I'll give you examples of what Hodgkinson says that I completely and utterly disagree with. And again, in future, I want to look at Spufford's book because I just think it's quite powerful. So this is an example of one of the things Hodgkinson says. When asked to tender, he's talking about literary critics and privileged people that he opposes himself to. When asked to tender book recommendations, these writers are fulfilling an enticing commission and doing so playfully and provocatively, with a genuine desire to share the delight of reading. Unfortunately, these endorsements can have the opposite effect and narrow the culture, forming a consensus that is the antithesis of the role books should play. Much worse, such lists and assumptions of well-readness foster elitism. Haruki Murakami, author of Norwegian Wood, agrees. If you only read the books that everyone else is reading, you can only think what everyone else is thinking. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer mocked the notion of a literary canon. Now, there's quite a few things I could say here, but I don't think Mark Hodgkinson realises how self-contradictory he is. So he's against the idea that he's against the elitism of this concept of being very well read. But in order to back up his position, he quotes Haruki Murakami, who's in Japan very famous and a lot of people say he's a literary author, but he's also has mass appeal. And Norwegian Wood, I'd argue, is one of his most accessible. There's the Beatles' Norwegian Wood song theme running through it. And it's years since I read it, but it's a romantic, as far as I can remember, it's a romantic undercurrent. It's a short novel, but Murakami's written some incredibly long, difficult, very involved things as well. Arthur Schopenhauer, who's a philosopher that Hodgkinson's quoting, also is
Thanks, Rod. Thanks,
niche. If you read Schopenhauer properly, it's not easy at all. So what I'm confused by here is, in order to back up his point, he then makes references to quite niche elitist writers, which I don't have a problem with, except it's self-contradictory because it runs against his own argument. I'm all for elitism, But if elitism for everyone, if that's not a contradiction in terms, everyone should be given the chance to aspire to the best possible taste. Again, to quote Kenny Everett. And this self-defeating idea that elitism of the mind is somehow wrong.
We're trying to blend this chant with
in terms of
the
athletics
Italian disco.
or football, soccer, basketball. The vast majority of the population,
I think we got the chant part. We just got to get some more Italian disco feels.
With Darwinian levels of selection and privilege when it comes to the highest levels of sport. No one says, oh, well, you know, even fat people should be allowed to play basketball professionally. No, you're not good enough. Get over it. But any type of elitism in the mind is automatically frowned upon. I just find it really odd that there shouldn't be an equal valuing of the life of the mind. So one of the guys he's criticising is this guy, I think it's Robert McCrum, but he was a literary editor of the Guardian newspaper and quite influential in British publishing for a long time. So McCrum's background and life experience is exceptionally rarefied. Most people do not have the desire, patience, or even the capacity to read, say, The Birds by Aristophanes, one of his recommendations, first performed in 414 BC. So, The Birds is a play by Aristophanes, but it made me think, and Hodgkinson latches onto it as evidence of how rarefied is the word he uses and how elitist this Robert McCrum is. And it immediately made me think, there's a play that Aristophanes did called The Clouds, which I'm trying to, I think it was 423 BC, so it was before The Birds. But The Clouds is all about, it's a satire on Socrates and philosophy and the way in which in ancient Greece there would be private tutors charging people to learn rhetoric and how to win arguments just through rhetorical flourishes. And The Clouds, I think it's called The Thinkery. It's an amazing satire that if you've worked in the modern university sector is still fresh, because it makes fun of the up its own backside, pretentious, pedantic, what would be the word, just the narrowness of people's interests, the lack of breadth, all of these things. But it's a brilliant, still relevant, written 423 BC. And Hodgkinson, with reference to The Birds, the same author, is just pouring scorn on the idea this could still be relevant today. For the benefit of the uninitiated, most of us, it opens with a conversation between two middle-aged Ephesians, Persitaerus and Euelpides, as they meet on a hillside. So it begins. He told us that these two birds would show us the way to Tereus, the hoopoe who once was human and turned into a bird. And he sold us the son of Tharalaides. Tharalaides there. Always on a word or two every video. Tharalaides there, the jackdaw for an oval, and this crow for 3 ovals, but they turn out to know nothing but nipping. So it's just about, as the name of the play implies, the notion of birds. Tharalaides, I think from memory, it's a joke in the sense a member of the likely audience. There was a famous guy in Athens, Tharalaides, who apparently was short and he had a very loud voice. So the insider joke is that real person is being compared to a jackdaw. The ovals are coins, which don't strike me as that difficult. Tereus was a Thracian king, I think. And the hoopoi is this mythical man who's turned into a bird. So I don't think any of this is particularly... Why is that so difficult? But Mark disagrees. The argument runs, and it may have validity, that within these classics of Greece and Rome lie the seed of every story and every character written thereafter. But too often it feels like a currency that only jangles in the pockets of the extremely well-educated. Most of the rest of us are at the window, locked out, wondering what an obol is, who Tereus is, and how exactly a hoopoe turns into a human. I just think he's over-egging it. Why are we on the outside? Why, especially of all the times with the internet, you can look these things up so quickly. But even if you couldn't, the idea that you might actually have to go and look in an encyclopedia and do a little bit of research to help you understand what these things are. I do find it fascinating, this anti-intellectual, anti-elitist attitude. And he goes on to say, who can recall the characters, plots, and scenes even from a book read as recently as just a few years ago? One or two episodes may jab themselves into the memory bank, but mostly the recollection will be elemental, the feeling you had while reading a book or were left with having read it. Again, I'm sorry, I couldn't disagree more. Unless I'm uniquely odd, I can remember huge swathes of books because they had such a profound effect on me. And I think the problem Hodgkinson has is he reads pretty rubbish books, to be honest. So he's just decried the fact that anyone would want to read something from 414 BC. But my counter-argument would be Aristophanes is still read because of this Darwinian survival, selection of the fittest. It's powerful, important literature, and it's survived millennia. In the lists of books that Hodgkinson provides in his own book, he reads very current, occasionally some decent,
I think I've had enough of this
stuff,
guy.
but far too often.
I think I've had enough of this guy. I am now going to play the new branding while I take a quick potty break. It's not a branding, it's a substrate. So I'll play this, and I don't even remember the last thing I made. So I'll just play the last thing I made on a stream.
30 seconds. I had a spirit, a very painful spirit hit my hearing. It sounded like a Horcrux from Harry Potter. You know that bad ringing sound. It was accompanied by pain, and it was for well over 24 hours on my top crap. This is my fault. What am I doing wrong? And I was talking with Alfred on his stream the other night, and teased it out. I was angry at a Christian, and I'm not saying this guy was right, but what I had as a Christian was to actually in front of Alfred and others, I confess that I was offended, that I was angry, that I was wrong, and I had to pray for the dude, that the eyes of his understanding heart would know the heights, the depths, and the breadths of the love of God. In my opinion, that's what Christian. If you want to know what Christian nationalism look like, it would be. Hey, I'm sorry that I got offended. Now this is what I think you did. Might be wrong. I'm sorry for what I did wrong in my response. And I just got that early this morning. Finally lived it off. So if anyone offends you, especially me, like this is gonna sound odd. Turn the other cheek. Yes, you're allowed to call it out. They know they're gonna act mean and irritated. They don't even want to act Christ. They don't understand. You're doing the best you can, and they're just.
I did not realize I was on cam already. And look who we have. I gotta get this music off. All right, there it is. And of course, Sartori, you come on looking like that, you know what happens. You get the full screen. Wait, why isn't it letting me do this? Oh, wait, because I gotta do it up here. Solo layout. What's up, big dog?
What's up? I find out the rules and I exploit them. That's what I do. So
I mean,
I'm a quick learner.
that's the reason for the rules.
Yep.
Is so that people will learn how to take advantage of them. I think Paul said that. Well, what's on your mind, Mr. Sartori?
Man, that was I wonder what the end of that video was, like if the guy was ever going to get there, like because the thing is that so these super rich people, the friends of Epstein, they have the same discussion. They just don't waste their mental time focusing on tea and coffee. They talk about the perverted equivalent of what that is, of the perverted equivalent of the only the tips of the green buds. That's their game.
So you think that it's that they their taste or that muscle of like discernment is being used in a different arena, not that
it's way stronger than ours. It's way stronger than ours, and it's for a very elite category. Like, I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like it's just that hideous strength. The inner ring, Lewis sketch. Like it's like you're always going into the smaller and smaller circles, and until you cross that line where it's like it gets into all the soul destroying stuff, and then even within there's a new like hierarchy, and so yeah, I mean that's like classically well known, just facts of life, about how evil operates in the universe and stuff like. But you can have. I mean, it's good to have those tastes. It's smart if you do it at cheap things like tea and coffee, because you realize like, hey, this is a fun way for me to be elite in this small arena that I can afford.
I think you've said a lot there.
Yeah.
And I was only half listening to the video because I was focusing more on the beat. But I don't know. I couldn't tell if he was trying to say that like elites look down on lower classes and their tastes, or was he saying that the rich, like that taste is something that should be like universal and democratic or something? Like what was?
Yeah. Well, so I think he really was confusing a thing. I think it might have been Aaron Wren that said it, or it could have been him talking about something that Rob Henderson said. It was one of those guys. But like they made this very clear distinction between elites and experts, because experts are the ones that like go all in on one subject, and they know like all the technical reasons about why something is the best. There's like some echo going on. I don't know if that's just.
That's my bad, bro.
Oh, it wasn't the most distracting echo, so I was ignoring it.
Yeah, it's just because I don't use headphones.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So like that, like experts, it's like Fauci or something, but then the elites are like Donald Trump, and obviously he's not.
Famous for his high taste.
He's not famous for his high taste, but he's very much an elite because he focuses on like the categories that are of most importance. And like
he wants his McDonald's in gold, please.
Yeah. Well, no, but the McDonald's thing is actually a perfect example. It's synonymous with the whole Maxwell House coffee, because it's like he does not want to have to use any more brain cells than he needs to spare to think about getting calories into his body. So it's reliable. It's cheap.
I think he genuinely likes it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it tastes good. I mean, but that's the thing. It's like you don't get to run the country if you're thinking about like, all this fine dining stuff. And even it's like, what's his name? Gavin Newsom there got in trouble for getting caught at the French Laundry. But it's like he's not really there for the food. He's there for the lack of poor people. So like that is. And I think that's probably where the things get confused, is because a lot of times like elite people and like will have these things that we we associate with good taste, but like whereas we would be like, this is a restaurant that I'm going to save up for and I'm going to go to once a year on vacation. For them, it's this is a restaurant that I can reliably assume will be free of weirdos and poor people that'll try to come up and take their picture with me. So like it's the same thing. They're using it for totally different purposes, though.
Tunji says bad taste is a sign of moral degradation. That was the point. The coffee and tea were metaphors.
Yeah, but well, that's the thing though. But you can have. It's like, it's not poor taste if you realize that you don't care about having, like, you can't have good taste in every domain of your life. Well, you can try. That's the TV show Frasier, a classic.
Well, yeah, you can tell this by the varying tastes in music, etc. in the corner. You know, so there's some people who listen to some real weird, you know, some music I wouldn't necessarily listen to. But speaking of which, I don't know what he listens to, but I bet I would only like half of it. It's our good buddy Nico, and with Nico, we can pop the V&A bubble. Welcome, Nico.
Thank you.
What you thinking about?
You know, I think the use of elite is kind of an unfortunate mistake. I think it's making more of a case for quality. Because elite implies that there is a separation, you know, between the common people and the elite, which I don't think it's a bad thing in of itself, but I don't think what he was talking about in the video was exactly about this separation between the best and the not so best.
Well, I mean, this is like, I mean, I'm not saying that the word obviously has like lots of different connotations. But I mean, I think one way you could put it in the mindset of is like, okay, so if you work for a company or something, and you might have somebody who is like the best in a technical field, they are an expert. But if they move to management, even though they're the best, they're the most expert in that technical field, once they go to managing the team, they might be a very bad manager because the technical expertise they have is not translate to them being able to lead a team well. Whereas the manager has a skill of dealing with people they're kind of able to look at things in a more abstract, zoomed out sense rather than focusing on the particulars. And they can actually make use of the expertise of other people. So they might rely on the guy who's the expert and say, who's the best person to put this job on? You know more about this stuff than I do. And that person can give that feedback. So they make use of expertise, but that is the elite mindset. So it can happen in lots of different like domains or whatever. Like,
good night, Tunji. Thank you for sharing this weird video with us all. What was coming to mind, Michael, as you were talking, was something like maybe in a perfect world, all of our elites are there by consequence of their competence and generosity and reciprocal, you know, the agreements being men of their word, women of their word, you know, that's, you know, the kind of ideal that the best people would have the most resources and would use it in the best way possible. In that ideal, it makes sense to me that the elites would set the aesthetic tone for all of society. That it would make sense in the ideal world for the opinions of aesthetics or taste and quality, like across all dimensions, would almost like by definition, you would want to look towards the elite of that society to understand what the society thought about that stuff.
Yeah. Well, you know, yeah, it's like and it's probably it varies very widely across different applications. Like the fact that they're talking about the provisions on Epstein Island, which is like a place of only, like, once you're there, you realize I am in a very exclusive circle of eliteness, and you're not gonna like anybody that's like striving is not going to be thinking about the coffee and complaining about it. And none of the elite people probably care about the coffee. But any of those people, if they were going to do some public facing thing, you know, they're throwing a gala or something, they're going to go find a coffee nerd and be like, you're in charge of the coffee, spend however much you have to, make sure everybody says this is the best coffee we've ever had in our life. And then they'll do the same thing for the wine people and whoever else, because then they are actually like interacting with people that have discriminating tastes in those other areas. But, you know, Epstein Island is about one thing or two things or something, you know. But,
is there an aspect, because when he was talking about the Maxwell piece, to me it almost came across as a little bit of like a manosphere take of like the real elite players, they don't care what coffee they're drinking, but they'll drink the coffee of like a business partner, because that's what is more important, is like sustaining those business relationships and, you know, getting to the top. And speaking of business relationships, welcome, Yoav. Oh, no. Oh, gosh, this is not. Let's see, I got to add you. Why can't I add you? What is going on? My StreamYard, I'm going to have to refresh. Bear with me. Let me hit some branding. Actually, if you guys want to talk, somebody just start talking, but I got to refresh here and get Yoav in here.
I don't know, Michael, about the thing about the elites. Don't you think that the someone who is really an elite, they would know themselves what the best coffee is? And then if somebody came up with some proposition of using this or that, and it wasn't up to their level, they would reject it.
They might. It depends on if they like coffee or not. Like the thing is that there's definitely a selection of things that they basically say, I don't have any time for this at all. And like we all kind of do that to some degree, but like, you know, it's you know, but even that in that way, like the elite person might be like, you know, because you'll have this like this thing in the movies, you know, where they like tell the person like this super specific like way to make their coffee, and so it's like maybe they'll do that if they care. In their day-to-day life, it's like they have the assistant that always makes them the coffee exactly the way they want it, and it might be a very good way to make coffee, but what they do. But like that, it is the offloading of decision making, because that's something that we all have a limited capacity for. So like once you get to a place where you're like have a very particular taste in something, you can have it like regularly, or you can be discriminating, but you know they're not probably thinking about oh, I want to try all the best coffee shops in a new city and try and see what's new, like because that's just not a way that they would value their time.
I'm going to leave some space for Yoav. I know.
I would like to share with you some of the wisdom of the Hebrew sages. And they asked the question, what is the measure of a man? How do you measure a man? And they say by three things. And it's open to interpretation like any translation of Hebrew. Three things. Koso, kiso, v'ka'aso. Koso, his cup. A man is measured by what he drinks and how he drinks it. Kiso, his pocket. And ka'aso, his temper. How well he behaves and hold himself. Koso, kiso, ka'aso.
So what he drinks, and I guess maybe also eats, so how good he takes care of his own body, how deep are his pockets, so how proficient maybe is what kind of skill they have. They can acquire things, so they are able to get things done in the world. And their temper. They're not ruled by their emotions, maybe something like that. Or how much do they know? How much do they understand?
As I said, open to interpretation.
Well, I mean, I would say, it's if you're going to be elite in something or expert in something, there are better and worse choices to make. So obviously the richest people in the world had to make very particular choices about what they focused on and what they ignored to get there. And what they achieved is impressive, but is that a goal that's something we should all be striving for? Probably not. We don't know how happy they are. I mean, I think, I think in some ways it's like being able to have taste and discrimination in the simpler things of life is a very virtuous thing to do, because then you can have a very elite kind of experience on a regular basis, and it'll lead you to contentment. So.
But I think that goes without saying. It's
Yeah, well, I think that guy just was obsessed with coffee and tea and books in like a way that he's not seeing. He is missing a bigger picture thing that's going on. I mean, the books is probably the more impactful part of the discussion, because books shape much more of your life than your morning beverage choice.
Well, how about for food? Everybody can agree that there are healthier and unhealthier foods. For example, isn't there something similar to that phenomena in music or movies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's across the board. So it just depends on what is most important to you. Like, because it takes a lot more time. It takes research. It takes effort if you're gonna like do all the healthiest eating and stuff. So any time spent in anything is time taken away from something else. I mean, I think it's the weirdest part is that we like to have competitions about it instead of being like, I'm so glad that you're an expert on coffee because I don't know very much about it at all. Why don't you pick my coffee order for me? Like,
but here's the thing. I'm not sure that. Okay, this may be a little out of topic, but one of the things I heard about the building of bureaucracy and the modern state was that these noble aristocrat elites had people to manage parts of their state. And it arrived the point where these people who were under these noblemen became more powerful than they. I don't know if elite people really do delegate like that. Maybe it's something more from our own times.
I think that I think that the best leaders do that, and I think that I think that the best way for our culture to run would be for people like, like if you think about like if it's a monarchy and you have the king that can step aside before he dies is in a lot of ways, like creating a better culture, because then he is like he's able to put his trust into the next generation, like in a very tangible way. And yeah, it means he doesn't have the same power anymore, and maybe he has to be you have to be reminded, like, hey, don't try to grab hold the reins anymore. You've stepped aside, because I think that's the thing, and that's like even what parents should be trying to do with their kids. It's like you don't want to just like you could just, it's not just to protect your kids and make sure nothing bad ever happens for them. If you're not helping them to grow into a adult role where they could like replace you, then you are kind of failing in some way. That's my kids are my only serious retirement plan, honestly. So it's like I kind of have to make sure that I raise them to be competent enough so that they can take care of me someday, and make sure that our relationships stay healthy and intact.
Okay, I would also like to bring an example from the Japanese culture. What happened in Japan is you had an emperor, and there was the court of the emperor, and there were the elite, and they were rich. And then there was a political upheaval, and the real power moved to the shogun, the vice emperor. And there was still elite at the emperor's palace. They have not decapitated the emperor and the palace and the royal family has remained. And they has remained as elite, but without the access to power and money as they used to have before. Mm-hmm. And therefore they have developed a particular modest, tasteful culture. One of the famous aspects of it is the tea ceremony that is refined and subdued, does not advertise wealth, but advertise taste.
Very similar to the way the British monarchy has gone too.
Hello, the young Levite. I was explaining to them before the saying, על שלושה דברים אדם ניכר על כיסו וכעסו. If you want to expand on that, you're invited.
Yeah, get in here, Hezi. Get in here, brother. Or feel free to, see what we're talking about. Join in a second. I had to step away to go to the restroom. Can someone catch me up to like the last 2 minutes or so? Are we still talking elites?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I have nothing to say about elites at this time. Please continue.
Our most famous coffee brand in Israel is called Elite, which is a smart marketing move.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about that movie is that some of this is about being separated from common people, looking like you're special. But there is a different discussion about the quality of things. What things are actually better. That's a different discussion.
I mean, your opinion would be that they aren't necessarily better, right, Nick?
Well, my opinion is that some things are better than others.
Okay, keep your secrets.
It's just like with food. Some food is healthier it creates a healthier body. And some food will take you to an early grave. It's There is this idea that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, blah, blah, blah. Every time I'm trying to create something that has some art to it, I have to decide, well, do I make a line here or do I make a line here? I'm all the time trying to, okay, no, this is bad. Erase it. No, this is good. I'm always trying to get the better thing. I'm much more comfortable arguing for the better than for the elite.
Yeah,
although I
that's a
could
good
make
way.
an argument for that.
I think, yeah. Well, I think like the original. It's interesting because if you think about like how these kind of leader positions arise, whether it's like in feudalism or something like that, or the way that the universities were originally intended that like people would learn a broad variety of things, and it was like the leader needed to have some level of expertise across a broad domain, number of domains, because he has to communicate the vision to like the people below him, and they might be experts. They might know more than him in a lot of things, but the amount of things that he's the amount of different types of people that he's over is so broad, and it is like the better idea is a good thing. Like it's weird how it's become like a elite, as in like the best in the world, kind of most exclusive. The disconnect from like the normal person or whatever that word has kind of come to take on, and especially because like how do people get into these positions of power and influence? It's not like the guy that builds a company from a ground up, like who actually knows what all the roles are. It's just like somebody comes in as a CEO of a company because they went to school for CEO stuff, and then they get, it's just like it's a totally different experience.
Yeah. And I heard this argument before, and that elites and the people used to be much closer to each other. But I do think there is a kind of hiding for people to accept someone as their superior. There is a kind of hiding yourself in a faraway place so that they can imagine that you are so much greater that you really are. So I guess it's like the two roads for the elite is that you can be flashy and let people's imagination imagine you to be better than you really are. Or you can be flashy in the sense that you're so much better at something that people get really, really impressed with your performance.
Yeah, I just shared a thing, just so you know, because it's weird. I have this weird relationship with like elitism or whatever, because I had some exposure to it with relatives and stuff that were like in that weird upper crust world, and it's like I think the funny thing is that really, like the funny thing about that video is that really it is exactly the same as like the kind of petty stuff that other people argue about. It's just that they argue about different things. They have a different set of like things that they care about, and which is to say, I mean, I would say in some sense they're not really elite. So yeah. So I guess the real problem is that our like signifiers are broken. Like somebody being wealthy or having a position in government or in a business world is not like an indicator of very much, really. Maybe about their competency in some areas, but not even necessarily. It's just a lot of it is circumstantial, and or it might be an indication that they actually have bad character, as you know, corruption tends to choose things or whatever. So.
Nico, do you have any connections to the quote-unquote elite? Do you consider yourself an elite? Guess same question to you, Yoav. Do you consider yourself elite or an expert on anything?
Expert I am. I'm an expert on color.
On color?
Yeah.
Huh? Are you a painter?
No, but I work in a 3D printing company when we print models of things like little statues. And I'm responsible of setting the color of those things we print so they become more accurate. It could be like models of action heroes, of industrial products like toothbrushes or dentures. All sorts of things that you want the color to come out right.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm no artist, just an expert.
You know, that kind of gets me thinking, because I guess I know a thing or two about my own crafts, but I guess the problem with the word elite is that it's kind of mixing two things at the same time. It's like noble and expert joined together.
Yeah, it's a bit different with the Jews. With the Jews, the experts are the elite. Experts in reading, the expert in the Bible. I mean, it doesn't your background or riches is insignificant. What is significant is, can you quote the Bible cover to cover?
They used to have other kinds of elites, but the Romans killed them.
Yeah, things happen after that as well. But
yeah,
with the Jews, your expertise is what makes you the elite. Alas, not necessarily in color. Color expertise doesn't count for so much.
See, you know how to tell the difference between a free man and a slave? It's in the eyes. So the free man looks to the front and to the sides, looking for prey and for threats. while the slave looks down to his work. And because he's looking down, he doesn't see the threats coming. So the free man is always on the lookout for attacks or for something to, an advantage to find. He's always looking into all the other places. Well, the slave is concentrated on one thing. This is why I separated the thing of elite and expert. Because you have like people that are like street thugs, people who live from crime. And these are very poor people, not very well read, maybe not even very smart, but they do have one thing in common, that they are always looking. And that's what they do. They don't have a job because having a job would mean that they can't be looking. And that they find things like that beneath them. Like they would be ashamed to do something like that. Even though it's mostly poor people. And the funny thing is that somebody who does have a job and maybe earns a lot of good money, it's easy pickings for a person like that. Because even though they have good money, the guy that's a criminal and he's always on the lookout, in a way, he has nothing to lose. And in another way, he's used to being in the fight. Well, somebody who works, maybe they wouldn't have what it takes to defend their own. And so there is an imbalance here.
Yeah.
And when you're not looking at it, when the person at work is not looking, there is a chance that somebody who is looking at them is going to move in and take over and put the tax on you.
Okay. Down asks whether no idle rich in Israel. First, it brings the question to what extent Israel is a Jewish state. Leave this aside. The most iconic story in Jewish society is the daughter of the idle rich man marries the clever poor rabbi.
Mm.
And about slaves, I haven't seen so many slaves in my life, so cannot comment about how they behave. But it is the common theory of right brain and left brain that yes, any human being, half of the brain looks for the threats and half the brain looks for opportunities.
Yeah. So, and that is a good way to split it. And the thing is that you gain a significant advantage when people are allowed to be more expert in both of those things, like your worker, because if everybody has to do both equally, you don't get the same level of expertise. So in some ways, like maybe, I don't know if it's exactly the right brain, but the person who's able to focus on social connections, assessing those threats, being a leader, if they put that towards protecting the people that are the workers who might be expert in the different fields and they value their input and things like that, that's like a really strong community system. I think some of the problems we have that develop is that we tend to think like that elites beget elites and that slaves only beget slaves, where it seems like people can and do pop up from in unexpected ways and unexpected places, and it's then dependent on how good the kind of culture is at sorting people or helping people to find their strengths, because definitely to have those different ways of doing things work together is better than having them at odds.
I was thinking about how this relates, and I'd love your take on this, Nico. How this relates to us being servants of Christ. I'm reminded of like the intro to James, and this is the Protestant view, so forgive me, but the idea that Jesus' biological brother calls him Lord and himself a servant of him in the first verse of James. I wonder, like, what does it say about where we should be looking and where to keep our eyes in our service or slavery of Christ? Any thoughts?
I would like to interrupt. We have the case of Abraham sending his slave to find a bride for his son. A slave sometimes can be quite a clever and intelligent person.
Yeah, it used to be that in let's say the classical age, to be a lawyer, you could have a slave that's a lawyer. In a lot of places, it worked more basically like a job, and the slave market was almost like a job market. There were all kinds of experts that were slaves, and maybe somebody would buy a slave, then they would pay for a tutor, they would learn something that was really, really complex, that you had to be smart to learn it. And then once they are learned, they would go back and sell them again. But now they are a slave that knows, I don't know, law or something. Yeah.
I think you probably also could make a similar case with the thing about like husbands and wives, because there's a lot of the thing in the traditional way of thinking, like that the man is supposed to be the head of and the woman is supposed to submit or whatever. You look at that chapter, Proverbs 31, where it talks about like the wife of noble character, and she's doing all sorts of like incredible stuff, and it's really that the husband, it's not saying she's doing this in opposition to her husband's command or whatever, but he's the leader that's wise enough to recognize her abilities and give her the free reign to do what she does best. And then he's still going to come in there and protect her, and maybe he's the one that procures some of the raw material of the land and things like that, or whatever. There's, he's playing a role in that, but it's like, it's the idea that like, the head and the body, well, if the head's always concerned about keeping the body from not misbehaving or whatever, the body's not going to accomplish very much. But if the head can trust the body to do what the body knows how to do well, they're both more productive and better off. So,
yeah, that's why.
So one of the things that comes up for me as you're explaining that, though, is the way in which both in the kind of paradigm of like slave perspective versus master perspective, in terms of like what you're looking at, like out towards opportunity or up, or I can't remember exactly where, the down basically at yourself, or possibly directly at the master in order to anticipate his desires, kind of a thing. But what struck me about what you said, Michael, was the idea. It's almost like the Christian idea of the difference between the leaves of the tree versus the fruit of the tree. And we're supposed to judge the tree by its fruit, or the tree will be judged by its fruit rather than its leaves. And of course, this is Kierkegaard that I'm channeling now, but there's a sense in which oftentimes the same actions can be done for completely different reasons. And I get the sense that there's almost like, what would be the distinction then in like a man who's just like working for his boss and trying to be a good employee so that he can accumulate wealth and impress women, and like, there's all these good side effects of like, yeah, and then maybe he could like, what I'm trying to point to, I guess, is a certain way in which I'm trying to point towards something different or deeper in the distinction that Nico first made as it pertains to being a slave to Christ. Because the verse that keeps coming up for me is the idea is serve your earthly masters as unto the Lord. And there's this weird way in which serving my master is serving the Lord. And so serving my master as unto the Lord looks the same way as just serving my master well. And I think that's, yeah, I don't know. There's something to be said about that. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, that's interesting because, think about like, what does he say to Peter? What does Jesus say to Peter? He says to Peter, feed my sheep. And so Jesus is saying like, you're mine, the sheep are mine. Your job is to take care of the sheep. So Peter's job is more leadership intensive than the sheep's job. In some ways, it's like the main thing about being a leader or being in control is that you actually have to take responsibility for the people beneath you. And that's like a healthy way that the kingdom is supposed to operate. If you're always worried about like managing them instead, like to manage their risk or their, keep them from error, if that's more important than you like feeding them and let them figure stuff out, then you're not really doing it the right way. But I think, because some of it's like, well, it's where the new shepherds are going to come from in that system. Some of them come from being sheep or whatever. So it's like, I think there is like, maybe that is kind of like the aspect of like theosis or something, sanctification even. We usually think about it as becoming more holy, less sinful, more like in a moral sense, but I think it also has to be an aspect of becoming more responsible and more productive even. Like if you look at that parable of the talents, it's like, yeah, it was the guy that produced the most profit that got in charge of the most stuff. And the other guy was in charge of less stuff. And the guy that didn't do anything, he was really trying to be like holy and not make a mistake. And he got punished pretty bad because that wasn't the point. So, it wasn't the point for him. Like he was supposed to be a leader because he was entrusted with that responsibility and he didn't live up to it.
Right. That almost speaks to something like, because again, I want to zero in on what should be one's attention as a slave. Because like, go ahead, Yoav. What do you think?
We were reading maybe the 5th chapter of Kings on Thursday. And I think you have your exact answers about being a slave or being a worker, because it describes how Solomon, the wisest man ever, how he organized his country and actually the whole of the Middle East. And as the chapter described it, he recruited or he conscripted a large part of the population to engage in large projects like building the temple. And he engaged the people of the Lebanon in cutting the trees for the temple. And there's a lot of food that needs to be provided to feed all of those people. So somebody, my guess in Syria, was growing the wheat for everybody. As the chapter, the words that the chapter describes is the word that we use at the time. It described them as the slaves of Solomon, and that he has appointed masters over those slaves. But I think this is more like a modern globalist economy, when he actually kept the people employed and he kept the people well fed, and there was peace and prosperity also the Middle East through trade, and talented managers were appointed to people well fed, and there was peace and prosperity also the Middle East through trade.
Had to mute Sartori. Looks like he accidentally unplugged his headphones when he got up. But yeah.
I finished.
Oh, did you? Okay. Okay, good. Nick, what were you gonna say?
So I don't think there is such a huge difference from slave, servant, employee. There are lots of variations between these looking down or looking to the sides, to the front. Because the thing is that there is a lot of, in this kind of libertarian world of talking about freedom and all of that. Well, here's the problem with freedom. It has to be maintained constantly. You can't be looking down. You always have to be looking to the sides all the time. If you're really serious about being a sovereign citizen or whatever, then no more watching TV, no more playing games, no more doing your thing. Also, no more working a job. Don't work a job. No. All of your time has to go into basically politics and conflict.
So here's the thing: is what you're describing. Kierkegaard also describes quite well as anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. And so, and you're right to say that one of the ways in which people engage or try to numb this anxiety is with a type of misdirected expertise or application of discernment, which would be towards the end of one's pleasure, one's own pleasure, right? Whether it be, and you can be as sophisticated as you want with your pleasure, whether it's like Mozart or a romance novel. But yeah, so keep going. I didn't mean to completely stop you, just to put up the Kierkegaard flag that, yeah, like I'm grokking what you're talking about from a slightly different angle, but please proceed.
Okay. I think I can see now the angle where you were coming from, because yeah, that's right. If you're just looking for more exquisite pleasures, you're not a free man, you're a slave. You're completely missing the point. But here is the other side of that coin, which is that you can't hold a mountain over your head with your arms. At some point, you're not free. You'll never be completely free. You're not Superman, you're not God. At some point, you have to actually be a servant. Bend the knee and look down. It's just a performance that you'll never be able to completely succeed at.
Right. There's something that I want to say, which is that, like, I think when you assume what you say about, like, there not being that much difference between a slave and a servant and an employee and that kind of thing. And even to to the point of Yoav pointing out some of the ways in which, or at least this is one of the pieces I got from it, which is like there is a sense in which when you have a good master, he kind of, and examples of this in the Bible are usually like good masters using their slaves well, or like guiding their servants well, and that this is kind of what it means to be a good servant, is to kind of obey good orders, kind of a thing. Um, and to kind of serve, it ultimately comes down to this idea of service, I suppose. But the problem is, once again, um, if Christ is calling us to a type of servitude, that can't mean that he's calling us to like look down or to look at ourselves constantly, right? Like, and even in the Old Testament, to be a servant of God is what is that dynamic that neither looks down, because basically, is he saying you need to be a servant who looks around like a master, or do you need to be a servant who looks up and allows the kind of the outside view for essentially for God to take care of what he can't see or what he's not looking at? So that would be where I'd want to, maybe point to. But there's also a sense where, and I think different different traditions probably even see this slightly differently, but it's kind of like, what is your perspective to service, and combined with what is your actual perspective on where you exist in the hierarchy, right? So it sounds like to me like you would want to make, Nico, two separate points. One would be essentially that, um basically what you just said, that like you're in this condition where you're forced to serve, like you basically, the Bob Dylan, you got to serve somebody. And so there's and it's not good to be a slave to one's passions. And so then the question arises, what is it good to serve then? If I have to serve somebody, where, who do I serve? And for a Catholic, that kind of becomes, you serve Christ through serving the church in some real sense. um I think for more individualistic people or more Protestant spirit, maybe even some Orthodox, the service is meant to be a direct line from you to Christ, to the Father, kind of a thing. And this is James too, right? Like a servant of God and of Christ Jesus, the Messiah. And so, yeah, what do you make of that? And also, Michael, welcome back. Feel free to, if you want to check your mic or something, but feel free to riff.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Michael, don't you want to go? Okay. Isn't there something similar between looking up and looking down? If you're looking at what you worship, that the center of your attention, what's around it, it loses focus. You're not so aware of the things that are around you. So that also makes you vulnerable. There could be a threat to the sides and you wouldn't know. But notice that it's kind of similar to like being a soldier in an army, and there's a big flag. And the idea of the big flag is that you would know where everybody is. So you know that you have to follow that flag. So you'll be looking up in the midst of danger, which normally would be a kind of a threat. But in being so united, there is a protection that you have. So both looking down and looking up, it makes you vulnerable. But looking up gives you something more that looking down doesn't give you.
I think that Michael Sartori actually may have connected the dots for me with just his fatherly affection on display, because I do think that it's probably the right moment to kind of interject and this isn't exclusively a Christian notion, but the idea of our being sons of God, whether by adoption or by selection in the Jews' case. But like, there is that sense in which children, as they're growing up, they watch their parents, and then their parents point out the things that the kids need to be aware of, right? That there's this, the good child looks to their parent and trusts that their parent is going to point to salient things. And if it weren't the case, then children wouldn't be able to develop whatsoever, right? Um, and of course, they're not thinking this thought like, I'm looking to my, maybe some of them are. If Marcher's still listening, he was probably this type of kid who was like, I am, looking beyond my parents as, as they point towards uh, salient, relevant information that is trustworthy in some sense. And so I wonder, to again blow that back up to the image of God, if there's a sense in which if you look up, that's when like God will direct your attention to, for like, to just put it as bluntly as possible, the neighbor you are meant to love, right? Like that's, if you are looking to God, the thing that he will most likely show you is the neighbor in need of love. Um, Sometimes he will look, sometimes he'll tell you something else. But Michael, you got to go. You want to have a final word?
Sure, I will take the final word. Yeah, in some sense, it is kind of like such an odd question or whatever, but like for both Jews and Christians, the thing is that God has a plan for creation, but for some reason he's chosen to mediate that plan through humankind. But he is our father. So he is like, in a sense, he worked for a week and then he retired. He created the world and then he retired. And he's there to back us up or to set us up for, when we need to. But like, it's that trust that he puts us in charge of things. And his trust and patience, much like King David, is kind of like, he's way more hesitant to intervene, it seems like a lot of times, even than we're comfortable with. Like, we would like it if he would step in and take over more often than he does. But I think part of that is because the purpose is for us to become more like him. So, yeah, it is very much a fatherly and kingly kind of role that
Well,
he's raising us towards.
that's also James 1, right? Like, rejoice in your sufferings because it produces steadfastness, which it essentially, the thesis of the argument is that the steadfastness, when it's had its full effect, produces the type of perfection that makes us worthy to be called sons of God, kind of a thing. That it's actually when our faith is tested in some real sense is when um, we're being provided the circumstances to become worthy of adoption, even though, and again, the already not yet aspect is also firing like fireworks last night in my brain right now. But I want to thank you, Sartori, for joining and getting this combo started. It looks like we've got some good fodder for edifying thought and conversation. So I appreciate it. Oh, we just lost Chris.
Yeah.
Well,
I would like also to say my last contribution
all right.
for tonight.
Well, once you leave, it'll just be me and Nico, and we'll just argue about something.
Sorry,
I'm sure of it.
it's past 11 p.m. here.
All right, excuses. We'll let you slide this time.
Yeah. So if you would like to see how would the human look like if they were more faithful to their master, or to the contrary, how would the human be like if they took no masters at all? This is why we have dogs and cats. Cats are slaves to nobody.
I don't know. I consider my cats my servants, but they're probably more like like I have all female cats. So sometimes I like to think of them as like my like I'm King Solomon, and they're like the closest thing I have to concubines, even though obviously I want to avoid all of the gross implications of that, but just in personality only. They kind of don't like each other, but they're always trying to like get my attention so they can get their belly rubs or get like snacks. But anyway, I feel like I may have overexposed myself with that comment.
Okay. Good night.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out, Yoav. Sorry I had to end that way.
Fully confirmed.
Yeah, I went full McWoke furry style. Oh goodness, Michael, get us back on track. I do want to put back on the table for conversation though the idea and maybe even the kind of absurdity or the conflict of the differing metaphors and how they kind of, you know, I think we're also kind of just circling an idea of what it means to be in Christ in some sense, especially now that our Jewish brother has left us. We can kind of speak candidly about who's the most important of all. Um, but all that stuff aside, I really do wish Hezi would jump on, because one thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently is kind of this dynamic or trinamic you've got with the like servant, child, and lover. I was reading on for reasons that I will leave to God. I In the past month or so I read both Song of Solomon and Hosea, um, which I think are a really good like back to back read, especially when you, because for me the point of that was to try to kind of pay a little bit more attention to the aspect of God as lover of our soul, because I do think that oftentimes we have an easier time talking, especially in public, about God as Father and God as Master. And I think that one of the things that makes Christianity so compelling is kind of the scandal of God as lover. And this is as simple, and you can see this in a famous of a verse as John 3:16, right? It was, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And I'm not trying to confuse agape, phileo, eros, any of that. I'm not trying to actually confuse those in any way, and I'm not really interested in a rehashing of the differences. Um, I'm more so trying to point to the way in which, like, if you don't kind of you err. It seems like to me you potentially err if you think of, if you only think one of those images or one of those signs, right? If you have as a Christian only think God as Father, there's there's some problems with that, and there are complications with that. If you only think of God as Master, there ends up being some problems and some complications with that. If you only think of God as Lover, there ends up being seemingly some complications and some errors with that. And so I want to know both of you guys' takes, and welcome, Michael. Feel free to also input what you probably came on to talk about. But let's start with Nico and then go to Michael. But I'd love you guys' feedback on what I just laid out.
Okay. It, there is a dynamic that is common to all of those. Isn't there something similar between master and lover? But, although
It's dangerous waters. I don't know if we want to go that far. But yes, there's of course obvious connections between master and lover. But I don't want to, this is a PG-13 stream as far as I'm concerned.
okay. Well, I'm trying to remember the name of the movie.
50
Help me
Shades of
out.
Grey? Is that what you're thinking of? 50 Shades of Grey?
No, almost. But no. So it was this movie about some kids going to one of these like military academies, and they are like problem kids. This is like a 90s 2000s movie, and they get a hard-boiled sergeant from the army that for some reason they try to get rid of him and stuck him in this military school. And the guy has like I don't know how it's called in English. It's like a gap between his two teeth. It's like a black sergeant. And there's this dynamic of the movie where the kids are unruly, and then this sergeant guy, oh, there it is, Major Payne. Yeah, that's the one. So there is this dynamic where in the beginning they don't respect him. They are just normal rebellious kids and stuff like that. And he is kind of stuck up. He's not a very humorous person, but by the end, there is this thing of, he believed in these kids and he made the difference. But there is this weird thing that you mentioned, McNall. I think it's in that movie. And it's not just in that movie, that's just one example. But there is a bunch of these movies, these genres of military training. It's not, I'm a soldier in an army. It's, I'm a recruit learning to become part of the troop. So here's the funny thing. There is always this scene where one of the recruits thinks he is above all of this. And he doesn't respect the sergeant. And then he makes some kind of trick. He tries to pull one over the sergeant. And either it works, but he gets caught, or the sergeant manages to undo the rules. And then it becomes this, so you thought that you were going to get rid of me or get one over me or something. I'm going to make your life miserable. I'm going to make you work 10 times as hard. There is this training montage where this guy just completely exhausts them, just screws with them, just to bother them. There isn't any learning process of, you have to learn to get that. No, he's just screwing with them for the sake of it. There is always that scene in these kinds of movies. And this is a genre that nobody pays attention to. So here's my challenge to you, McBo. What's the symbolism of that part of the story?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm definitely picking up what you're throwing down. Like if I hear you correctly, and I definitely want to get Michael in here next. But if I hear you correctly, what you're pointing to is the way in which our whole culture, our whole culture's idea of authority has been so misconstrued and so kind of the well has been so poisoned by our kind of liberal priors that we misunderstand the nature of authority. And this is why we don't easily see the connection between something like or maybe it's better to say that the liberal assumes the absence of a concept like authority in a love relationship, because this was your response to the idea of adding in the lover concept, that we may be in danger of not being able to even properly understand the fact that there is an integration of the lover and the parent and the not just the father but also the kind of general, right? Like the authority. I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord, I was brought up to sing. Battle Hymn of the Republic is in my veins, not only because my mom and sister went to UGA, but also because we sang it as a hymn during our liturgy. Southern Baptist liturgy, as low as it may be, still has its rituals. But yeah, so I see you kind of pointing toward this idea of, and I would probably put it maybe a little. I mean, I think you did a wonderful job, but to say it, I would point to it as a possibility, right? That we have failed to understand authority in a way that we're hopeless in understanding love because we think that there's no aspect of authority present within love.
Yes.
Yeah. I know you, Nico. We've talked for thousands of hours off screen, so it's always pleasantly surprising to me that you think I don't understand what you're saying, but it's mostly due to your accent, not because of the incoherence of your thought. But Michael, get in here, brother. What do you have to say?
Well, I was mostly just trying to take over on Michael duties since Sartaro left.
Yeah. We need a handsome bearded man to keep us in line.
Right.
Please continue.
So in that movie, Major Payne, what was that? Damon Wayans that's doing it. So he's playing a Marine. Now there's a couple of Marine Corps movies that that like those of us who went into the Marine Corps would watch. That's not like one we would focus on, but we were usually had watched it. Somebody had watched it because, like, when you're prepping to get in the Marine Corps, you're just like, what am I getting into? And so you're just like watching every movie or something that you could get your hands on. Look, when you get into that and you're in boot camp and stuff, what you hear a lot is, this is not a democracy. This is a dictatorship. Right? Okay, so the obvious thing there is the Marine Corps is a authoritarian dictatorship in fascist form, and necessarily so. Right? So people disagreeable like myself, especially at the time, incredibly selfish and disagreeable, struggle because maybe I knew better, right? I'm the rebellious kid within the platoon that goes, oh, well, I know better than what the sergeant, what the corporal, what the whoever's in charge, right, thinks. One of the things that even while I was still in that phase and still in the Marine Corps, that really hammered home for me, even though I struggled to live this out, even though I, in a thinky talky way could understand it, was, all right, so you get onto the battlefield, like you actually get into an awful situation, right? And all of a sudden, imagine that there's, let's say just 4 of you. Somebody's in charge, right? You're all about the same age, right? It's a bunch of 20-year-olds. And, you're in Iraq, you're in Fallujah or something. It's actually dangerous. There's bombs all over the place. There's snipers on rooftops. There's people just carrying bombs, just for suicide attacks. Okay, well, what do you do? So all 4 people can deliberate, right? Oh, well, here's the best idea. Here's the best idea. But you don't have time for that. You don't have time for deliberation, right? In order to survive that scenario, the way that the Marine Corps talks about it, that is held up over time, is you're more likely to survive if the 3 of you shut up and listen to the guy in charge of the squad. Because if everybody's doing the same thing cohesively as a unit, you're more likely to survive. They might make the wrong choice and you all die. That's absolutely possible. But what we can guarantee you is that if you all sit there and argue about it, right, you're probably going to end up in a real bad situation real fast because you don't have time for that. Okay, so here's this scenario where fascist structures, right, like a kind of male authoritarianness ends up practical and wise even. All right. Now, in order to do that, the people in that squad that are following that squad leader, there has to be love at play, like love for your brother, right? You care about them surviving and you're willing to submit yourself to what that squad leader is saying. So the 3 of you, right, are looking to that guy and going, we're putting down our wills to trust you, right, to try to guide us through this. And then the guy doing it, right, if he's just has some weird selfish ambitions, right, well, he might get them killed. But if he has love in his heart, he has to go, okay, well, what's being executed here? What's the telos of our group or something like that, right? What's the aim? Are we accomplishing that aim? And that aim usually incorporates survival, right? So then he has to have love for who he's responsible to, who's in charge of him, that has issued that order. And he has to have love below him for those following him and their survival and their loyalty. Hey, sure, McBow, not to deliberate on, types of love or something, but what especially in the Marine Corps, what would be held highest is, and like all these like Medal of Honor winners. So I remember going through. I'm gonna tie this together. So types of love, as embodied in the Marine Corps, and what they hold highest, or specifically like an agapic love of putting others higher than yourself. So when we're in training, they take us through this big camp, and there's little stations that you stop at, and each station has a story of some Marine that won like a Medal of Honor, right? So at each one of them, what I remember most, I'm sure there was lots I don't remember, but what stood out to me that I can remember was most of them had like jumped on a grenade, right? So what they do is they have to like pop their helmet off and then go thrust themselves and jump on top of a grenade and try to cover the grenade. When you do that, you know that it'll kill you, right? But that everyone else will survive. So it's like almost a hot potato thing. So everybody's trained to, if you see a grenade, you gotta grab your helmet, go jump on that grenade. Chances are you're not going to make it, but at least your squad survives.
Captain America style.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I thought that was an incredible weave, to say the least. And I think that one of the things that, along like what you said, along with what Nico said, is there's a resonance, and I think it's, from a Christian perspective, it's very simple, but there's a depth to it that's striking me at the moment, because God gives us these different images or signs or symbols of himself to us out of necessity, because we can only understand what we can understand, right? But there's a way in which the through line of love in the relationship of father to son, the relationship of the genuinely good master to slave, the relationship between the general or the captain or the corporal to those beneath him, the relationship between husband and wife. The through line in all of these is love, right? And so, of course, John, God is love. It's pointing to this kind of disclosure. And what's interesting to me is the way in which contradiction, or I would want to put it as an absurdity, and this is one of the things I mean when I kind of point to Christian absurdity as a perhaps a useful tool, ecumenically, universally, to understand not only Christ but but humanity, is this way in which the disclosure of God to his children, to his lover, to his soldiers, to his sons, always carries within it this opening, this breaking of the metaphor, where Nico wants to say, basically, we can't understand love because we don't understand authority. And you're pointing to the way in which love is necessary for the utility, or even like for there even to be soldiers. The existence of such a concept kind of requires this kind of telos and this love. For me, that's all pointing to the way in which we are kind of forced to look at the incompleteness of the metaphors that we're able to kind of grok on our way to God. And this is kind of also my response to Al in the comments, bringing up Dasein from Heidegger. Dasein from Heidegger is, when you compare it to this kind of self-revelation of not only the God of the universe, but his particular opinion, which is the ultimate reality of us. And so the Christian is forced to kind of grapple with the ways in which we can't hold all of these together in our minds, right? The fact that he is our lover and our father and our general and our master and our savior and our Lord, like all of this is the absurdity of the freedom within Christ. But the Dasein is merely this kind of reactivity to the fact that we can ponder ourselves, in a sense. And so I would want to stray away from Heideggerian language such as the Dasein, because what he does is takes, from my perspective, all of the insights that I've kind of formed my views on most of these things from Kierkegaard, and he's kind of like enclosed them in this kind of Ouroboros of we can't actually or that it's not cool to kind of think of it from this perspective of a personal God, a God who became flesh. Heidegger wants to disincarnate all of the existentialism brought to you by Kierkegaard, and he wants to say that, well, we can kind of come to this conclusion based simply on our fact that we are the types of creatures that can ponder our own existence. And so I get this is one of the reasons why I get triggered by Heidegger. But anyway, any of you guys have any response to what all of the verbal diarrhea I just kind of laid out?
I do. And it relates to some of what you were saying before as well. And that was some of my first inclinations to respond to before I got on the Marine kick, because the major pain thing. So in Orthodox and Catholic circles, especially like the Thomistic circles, there's a fight going on right now because of a debate about whether Muslims worship the same God. And what the Orthodox circles are trying to reiterate is the importance of the father and son distinction, especially, right? Because, all right, so in so much as there is a union, right? And we have father and son. There's distinctions. We would talk about some essence energy stuff, and I could probably use more proper language, but confusion between a father and a son, that's a problem. I've been wondering if, well, so I was listening to Lord of Spirits, and Father Stephen DeYoung on there was talking about how in Leviticus, it gives us context about nakedness, especially in reference to Noah's nakedness, and that the curse of Canaan has to do with a confusion between the father and the son, as the son effectively and grossly in this context, what the implication is that he tries to what's the word that I want? Well, he has relations with his mother. So the son has relations with his mother. Okay. This is a confusion of identity. This is part of the nakedness problem. Now, if you grant me just enough to work with that, and whether or not that's even laid out there, but if you'll grant it to me. All right. To confuse the son and the father, where a rebellion from the son and the son tries to become the father, obviously that's going to create chaos. I mean, you could imagine this like some kind of weird medieval sort of thing, right? Or some kind of ancient idea of maybe there's the king, right, and his queen, and then the prince, in a way that he is trying to start a rebellion against his father and take his place or something in a very gross way, has relations with the queen, right, in order to get the father out of the picture and to somehow create a different lineage. It's gross. It's awful, right? This is part of why why there's an insistence on men need to leave the home when they're adults, right, and go start their own family, in order to not confuse these identities. Whereas maybe the suspicion might be like within pagan circles, this stuff isn't so common sense, whereas it seems like very common sense to Christians. All right, so that might sound like it's like spreading too far out from the original point, but I'm pretty serious about how this relates, because if we confuse, like, so the way I grew up, right, in a lot of circles I'm in, God. We should make this noise all the time. God this, God that, God's will for my life, something. Okay. If there's confusion, in theory, about the nature of the father of the son, right? Or our relation as the bride to the bridegroom, right? And understanding the son as the bridegroom. If we mix these identities together and get them confused, there will be chaos. There will be problems. And that's part of what has to be sorted out here.
Nico, what say you?
You know, I don't really know the answer, but maybe it's more than the relation to God. It's the thread that unites all of these other relations, like the parent, master, lover, etc. But it becomes a little hard to imagine, I guess. But I think if you find an example from another part of life, it becomes more understandable. So I don't know if you're familiar with Alexander the Great, but I don't know if the idea of God as the groom was always such an unintelligible thing. Because if you look at that story, it really works out like that. Alexander is the groom, and his army is the bride. So let me give you an example. So you have this army of like battle-hardened veterans, like people that had no trouble at all, just doing butchery things, that been through the worst. They get to the east of Persia, I think it was. And Alexander wants to keep going to India. And up to this point, the army, the soldiers, they've had enough. And what they do is basically they pout and they say that they're not going to move anymore. We're not going anywhere. So consider this. You have all of these battle veteran, grisly veterans, battle-hardened veterans. And instead of they taking the initiative and they going, oh, I'm an alpha male and I'm going to do what I want. Basically what they do is they cry to Alexander, this old beard-wearing Greeks with weapons that are much bigger in size and number than Alexander. They just are complaining and pouting, and we're not going to move any further from this point until you listen to us. Isn't that some, what's going on over there? Isn't there some kind of strange behavior? It's them who follow Alexander. But if these people, you remove them from that context where they're in the army of Alexander, they don't behave like that. They take initiative. So the behavior changes depending on the place.
Nico, do you so let's say I say God is the bridegroom. God is the bridegroom, right? what do I mean? Right. And is it important on whether or not are there, but here, let me phrase that differently. Are there consequences if I see the father as the bridegroom instead of the son? If the image differs, are there consequences?
Yeah.
Well, and this is essentially a problem solved by Islam, right? It's you submit, and you don't worry about basically that I thou relationship, right? It's you submit, and that's all you need to know about love is the submission part of it, and that works for the father, that works for the general, that works for the master. You just submit, you do what you're told, and everything ends up being okay.
So I should listen to my employers and listen to their DEI recommendations.
As unto the Lord, right? You serve them as unto the Lord.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, like, but that's the right. I mean, that's the issue, right? Is this kind of we're put in these positions of subordination, and then and this is also a fairly kind of obvious critique of subsidiarity, right? Is that it's but but it's also addressed to quite directly by at least Paul in Romans that says, you submit to the authorities, and
Yeah.
so there's this recognition of your place in the hierarchy. But then it, in the Old Testament, maybe more so in the Old Testament than the New Testament, God seems to reward the type of boldness or the type of, I mean, in Nico's image of the general, these like experienced generals taking the role of the complaining wife, the shadow matriarchy. There does seem to be a sense in which um part of recognizing our role and recognizing the distinctions between the different um images, I suppose, or identities, you could even call them. um yeah, basically the point I'm trying to make is like that's the same relationship it seemed many of the prophets had with the Lord, and Abraham, pleading for Sodom and Gomorrah, or Moses pleading for the people of Israel, um, et cetera, et cetera. There's this kind of and even in Christ, saying that like when you pray, you should be like the annoying woman who just keeps begging and begging and begging and begging until eventually you know the the guy in charge gets annoyed and does what she asks, or addresses the issue. And so yeah, I think that here's what I'll say. I think a lot of what characterizes the online waters we swim in with people like Homath and the Manosphere is trying, and this is why Christianity is so important, or solves all of their issues basically, right? Is because it's in Christ there is neither male nor female, and now wrestle with that for 2,000 years. And also it's like, be mighty men of God, but in your relationship to God, take the role collectively as his bride, and then personally as, um the Song of Solomon, right? Like it's a metaphor, it's an analogy. The All of the church fathers kind of agree on that it can't purely be the base level eroticism that people want it to be. It's obviously pointing to this kind of, do you see what I'm saying this kind of feminine relation, this type of, I'm in complete need and complete desire, like this scene, and especially in Hosea, but in a lot of the Old Testament and New Testament, Christ saying, if I could just scoop you up, um, like a mother hen, that I think that this type of thing needs to be really wrestled with, especially on the type of manosphere, new conservative Christianity that wants to say, in response to, and I grant this, in response to a culture that has demeaned the value of men and erased, it's been wasp erasure, it's been white man erasure, like it's been masculine erasure. Like this is all I can sympathize with all of that. But I think if Christianity's only telos was to create like strong men that were attractive to virtuous women, so as to make wholesome families that continued the species in a wholesome and robust way, then I think that it would be very foolish to essentially take in to real understanding all of those quite counterintuitive images and symbols and identities that God seemingly puts us in when he's wishing to disclose himself to us. Does that make sense?
So you know how we're we're told not to use his name in vain, right? I think about the I think like pointing at Hallmath or like Andrew Tate or something like that. I think that's like a super great example, right? And like it kind of parallels with sort of a will to power, who's the strongest sort of thing. And then you got the interesting, critique on that from let's say Peterson, right, where he goes, all right, well, it's not really the strongest, like, or the most powerful, or who could kill the most people, who ends up winning out through like a Darwinistic frame, right? It seems it's a different kind of man that does, right? It's the man that would die for his bride, let's say. Okay, so then what I see out of the whole math Andrew Tate problem is I think that they use the name in vain. Now, whether they say the word God or not, and depending on who you're dealing with, they will. But there is a false image that they latch on to. They've lost the Father, right? And the reason why they've lost the Father is because they're in a broken. Their union is broken with the bridegroom, the Son. Right? They're unable to identify the Father because they've broken their union with the Son. Right? So the only way to become someone worthy of being a father to your bride, or being a husband to your bride, and to being a father to your children, the highest form of that, the only worthy form of that, is should you, as a faithful bride, be wedded to the most faithful bridegroom in the Son. And I'm suspecting more and more that where we've lost that image, in all the different ways, that we use his name or a name in vain, is responsible for a lot of this.
Rather than bringing up Kierkegaard again, I'd like to give the floor to Nico. What say you, sir?
Yeah, I think so. It's the missing of the third. I think it is what unites two is the third that has to stand above those. If you don't have the third, you can't unite the two. That's why you can't be neither for men nor for women. You have to be for the thing that is above them. Some people could say, like some atheists could say, it's the family. And yeah, you could do that. But then you're just kicking the can down the road of that. Well, what kind of family? because everything needs a context, and you just keep going up and up and up until you reach the new thing that needs no context, that is God. Because otherwise it doesn't make sense. It's talking about things outside of the context. It's like, imagine a man. Well, that man is dead because you forgot to imagine the air that he needs to breathe. It's something like that.
I do think there's something to that. Obviously, the point being, oh, I got to echo. The point being something like, we obviously shouldn't trust the imagination to be able to supply a 100% reliable image of the God of the universe, right? Like, so I grant you that, but I wonder to what extent that we I don't know, like, I get the sense often that we kind of stop where it's easiest to stop for us, right? That we either stop at the mere kind of assessment of hedonism bad, submission good, or that we stop at the level of judgment in some real sense. When the point that's interesting to me is because we're not talking about natural law, right? Like, this is my point. Like, in so many ways, the natural law explains so many problems that, you know, folks have these days, right? It's very rational, it's very logical, and almost objective to point to the natural law and say we're missing some things. But I think one of the things that I'm trying for us to effort towards is the actual kind of revelation of God through Scripture, through the church, through tradition, and the sense in which, if all, like, say, you know, it's essentially the idea that, okay, you've mastered the natural law and you see how that solves 99.9% of the problems in your current age, in society, politics, et cetera, et cetera. But there still seems to be this, like, gaping hole, which is primarily the narrow way, i.e., the way, the truth, and the life, i.e., be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And that, so the saint or the Christian is essentially, like, put in this place where what he sees on the outside and how he sees the world going, he can kind of discern for reasons of, like, natural law, right and wrong. But that it's a very different thing to kind of grapple with the ways in which it becomes obvious that I don't understand what I'm talking about, because all of the symbols and metaphors given to me are meant to be taken within community. And this was also something that I think you were pointing to, Michael, where it's like, and I think I've said this before, probably better or maybe worse, but it, you know, my thought, like, the idea or the concept or the reality of fatherhood, for instance, just to take one of them, gets its identity from God as Father. It's not that God somehow in his essence or in his identity is constrained by the concept of father. It's the fact that we wouldn't have fatherhood, we wouldn't have any, you know, that there's a primary and secondary reality essentially to the metaphors. Yeah. This, of course, the metaphors don't work like someone who's a secularist or a perennialist would think, right? Like, it's not the elephant, the blind man and the elephant kind of a thing. It's this idea that we understand fatherhood from the aspect of God as Father. We understand our submission to our earthly masters out of the authority that was given to Christ through the Father. Like that kind of. Do you see where I'm going with that? That because we misunderstand this kind of essential directionality between God as he discloses himself, not only in reality, in natural law, but also particularly within Scripture. I feel like that should put in us a great humility when discussing essentially all of those secondary relationships, shall we say, and that we should, our understanding of God should have more purchase on our understanding of those lower relationships than our understanding of those relationships have purchase on our understanding of God. Did I stick the landing at all, or am I just a raving madman who's been streaming for too long?
I'm catching whiffs of it, McMall.
Turning religion into a utility.
Say that again.
Yeah.
Turning religion into a utility. Is that where you're going?
Well, I would be afraid of a utilitarian religion, right? That a religion taken for the purposes of getting from A to B, rather than a type of religion that unravels and dismantles the powers of the flesh, the devil, and the world, kind of a thing, right? Like I would be more interested in a religion that, of course, has a telos, but whose ultimate telos is not its mere utility, right? Like, because that becomes kind of what's the word? I can't remember the word, but it basically just refers to itself. It's like a loop, right? Like the point of the religion is to be the religion that is efficient and you can use to your own ends, kind of a thing. But anyway, yeah, Michael, what say you?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that came to mind, funny enough, going back to the Marine Corps thing, what I'm going to try to get at is sonship, but like to get in that space. Okay. So when I'm in the Marine Corps, okay, I don't think this is going to be hard to grasp, even if you like weren't in the service or something, right? So like, here's all these recruits, right? And they get, even, vetted to actually be a service member. You got to go through this boot camp thing. If you make it through, then you're a part of this thing, right? They pin a little thing, Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. Okay, you're a Marine now. Great. Now, I was a particularly rebellious Marine. I really wanted to do things my own way, whatever, right? Like I always had sort of one foot out the door by the time I got in. And I stayed that way for most of it. There was little bits where, maybe I'd try harder than other times, but I kind of had one foot out the door the whole time. But some guys were like super dependable and really about it, right? And just like, they're the commanding officers or their whoever's in charge of them, their NCOs, whatever, knew that they could count on that guy, and he was an exemplary Marine, a really good example, something. Now, insofar as that guy wasn't just like going through the motions in order to I don't know, like get promoted or whatever, but his heart was really in it, and so were his works, right? His whole self, like actually really loyal, genuinely. Then that kind of guy has a sonship that I didn't have. Now, I was part of the children of this thing, right? I'm part of the greater body, but that's different than really being all in, right? And so when Paul is talking about the agios, the saints, the picture that I see out of that I think is a little bit harder for us to understand from a lot of our backgrounds, especially mine, was, okay, look, you could like sort of be inducted into this thing, and you got the badge, right? You've been pinned, right? You're a Christian, whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're chasing after this sonship, that you're the one that's like really all in, not for some utilitarian means. Your whole heart, all your actions, your entire life, everything that you do, right? But the people that are, Paul is saying, those agios, in that level and that kind of deep sonship will be lifted up above what we've been lifting up in the pagan gods, Zeus, Athena, whatever, these demons, right? And so they and the Caesars, right, that are declaring themselves gods, we're going to lift up those who were part of this faithful bride, like really have the sonship within the bride. They're going to be lifted up instead. We're going to remember their names, right? And we're going to recognize that they are at that sonship, at that loyalty, because they will bear the image of the Son. Right. So understanding that distinction, right, ends up part of a crucial hierarchy in what we're a part of and the spiritual battle that we're actually in.
Okay, I'm kind of lost.
So the reason why that relates to me, okay, is what I got out of what McMo was saying, right? Between concerns about utilitarianism, or are we, as Christians, are we just the saints? It's like, look, only the Father knows. Only the Father knows your heart and how deep you are into this. But it will actualize, and there will be actual fruits. We do see, like, unlike me, I'm just like some chief of sinners. Right? This is not me. I have nothing to boast about. But when you encounter someone that is really faithful, is genuinely faithful, right, in the fullness of faithfulness, man, that's a stark contrast from the folks that might be there for utilitarian means, right? That just sort of, but these, and then maybe to like take one step further. I mean, this is all I've got to relate to what McMo was getting at, but yes, those roles that we see, right? Like, what's a good father? How does that father help us understand the Father? Yeah, they're like symbols and pointers. They're certainly not all encompassing, but they're images that allow us to point our hearts in a way to bear the full image. So, and as far as any of that lands, by all means, but if it doesn't, I think that's the best way I have to communicate it.
Yeah, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down. Yeah, there is something about sonship that seems primary, and also like, yeah, I think you're also helping us not to forget the reality of, like, we find ourselves in a spiritual war, right? Like it's yes, sons, yes, lovers, yes, servants, but also we do find ourselves within this situation of spiritual warfare. But with that, I do want to invite all of us to kind of give our final thoughts. And I want to paint a little bit of a picture of the conversation as I see it, to just kind of maybe jog all of our memories about the conversation, and just to kind of help us form final thoughts. But it's interesting to me that this all started with Tunji recommending us watch this kind of thing on expertise and elites and taste, and that kind of parlayed quite nicely into this idea of, basically discernment or judgment of quality, right? Like almost discernment of the good could be a description of kind of what we were going over at those first stages. But then I think there was a real turn that happened when we started talking, when Nico brought up the image of the difference between masters and slaves and what they look at. They're the center of their attention. And that kind of brought about this question of like, well, we're supposed to be servants of Christ, but looking down, that is to say, looking within ourselves, seems to be the opposite of helpful, or at least to the point of when we look at ourselves, it's a very difficult time. We have a very difficult time not getting lost in what I like to call sin consciousness, right? And just the kind of unbearable weight, either of our freedom to do the good and the bad, or of our inability, our slavery to our passions, our slavery to the influence and temptation of the world and the devil. And so I think that through the rest of the conversation, we were trying to really drill down on some maybe useful insights from all of these different metaphors and the ways in which love, submission, authority kind of works itself out in these different real life circumstances that God himself has given us to point towards himself. And then I think we've landed in a fairly nice place, and I do need to upload the beat that I've made, which I think is right along with this. I think we've had a pretty near perfect kumbaya stream here. Not many disagreements, or at least we haven't dwelt on the disagreements, even though me and Nico could probably, if there's a hunger out there for real disagreement, I'm sure between an Orthodox, a Catholic, and a heretic Protestant autodidact who doesn't think about what he says before he says it, I'm sure we could get into trouble. But what I'm trying to say is I think we've done a really good job, and I want to hear final thoughts, maybe first from Nico and then from Michael, and then I'll maybe have a little something to say after that. But yeah, this has been great fun. I need to upload this beat. I forgot to say, this is the beat I teased on Twitter. I think that we might have gotten close to doing what I was trying to do, which is blend this kind of Italian disco summer vibes that people like Matt Krotz and Cale Zeldin are trying to promote. This Italian culture, like maybe the problem with Rome is that they've forgotten they're Italians. Mixed in, blended with this Anglican chant, these heretic Protestant innovators actually performing traditional, ritualistic, liturgic, worshipful singing in English. All right, so I've done my spiel. Nico, what say you, sir?
I didn't know. I don't really know anything about that Italian disco. Maybe I should look more into it.
You should. You look like an aficionado. You look like a creator of Italian disco.
No, really. Maybe I should get acquainted. But I guess all of that happened on X, or previously known as the artist Twitter. And I don't hang around those places very often. But on the topic, I think the most interesting thing was this kind of going from one thing to the other, rather than concentrating on any one of the topics that we went into. What to me the most interesting thing is that we started with the Fuji video, how all of those things are connected.
Pretty cool. I agree. Michael, last words, and feel no need to rush. I still have to bounce this thing, sure. And so if you end too soon, then I'm gonna be kind of caught with my pants down here, and I'm gonna have to scramble. So feel free to lay out your final thoughts. No word count limit. Go off, King.
Thankfully, no one accuses me of being brief. Usually, there's been this ongoing anxiety that is heightened, which I've felt before about a rise in a kind of masculine authoritarianism. right, in response to, liberalism or kind of the communist thing that we sort of found ourselves in. But a different kind of authoritarianism. But man, it wasn't that long ago before when I was like taking on the label of anti-fascist and punch Nazis and all this. That wasn't that long ago for me. That was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And I bared that image for the better part of 15, 20 years. So, I find myself steel manning a lot of what Jonathan Peugeot is saying, which is from our Orthodox circles, we're not saying like, yay, necessarily. We're going, we can see it coming, right? That because the thing we're in is so old, that we sort of, and especially like some of the circles that we've been in, like whether it's Arabic circles that got conquered by Islam, or the how communism rose up out of Russia, and the sort of fascism that turned into with Stalin. Okay, like we can sort of see the we can see what's playing out, right? Now here part of the good news that we're offering here, that we're trying to get at, like, and part of what sonship and bearing the image of that sonship looks like is like, bless those who curse you, right? You're in the world, not of the world. Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? So, I think about my Palestinian godfather, okay? His family, as far as he knows, like he was born in Bethlehem. As far as he knows, his family's been there at least 2,000 years. They've been through some weird shit, some real weird shit. And, there's going to be tribulations. Tribulations are going to come up, right? You don't have control over the world, right? But to let go of the anxiety, put the anxiety down, right, and set your eyes on Christ. Because the only way that you'll drown in all of this is if you take your eyes off of Christ, right? That's when we sink, right? Versus setting our eyes on him and somehow rising above it. So that's good news, right? That's evangelion. That's hope. That's a gospel.
I'm once again reminded of James. Count it all joy, brothers, when you experience various trials, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and steadfastness, having its full effect, produces the righteousness of God. So that was the most preacher voice I think I've ever gotten on the hot stream, the cookout. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining in. Thank you, Michael and Nico specifically. Also, shouts out to the other Michael and to Yoav and to Chris Howard, who joined shortly. Thanks to everyone in the Hive Mind, making us feel, you guessed it, virtually not alone. Let's send them off. Here's the Anglican chant mixed with the Italian disco, with probably like some of us, participating in Dialogos. That's what I would say, which would be the sample of our audio. So enjoy it, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye. And I'll play the music and then play the new branding brought by Ups. And I got to make sure everybody can hear it, because that's important.
As we always love as it all, and the coming of our Savior Jesus Christ.